Alex, do you have anything you'd like to say? I know we didn't talk about this, but since you're up here.
Can they sit down?
Yeah, sure.
I already feel bad enough. Thank you, first of all, and for the opportunity, Carly, here, and everybody here in Moab. We have a ton of love. Most of all, our police department, everyone who works here. There are only a couple of faces that have been here before I was here. The giant amount of work that we've done this last year, all of us to get to where we are, makes me very proud that I would be selected in this position to continue us moving forward. And I know the great people that I have, that we have in Moab, in my community, our relationship with the sheriff's office in the city, that we're going to continue to keep this train roaring down the tracks. And I'm very excited for what control. So thank you for the opportunity. Thank you guys for my opportunity to work with you.
Okay, so now we're moving on to our regular meeting. You guys are welcome to leave. And we'll take about 5 minutes and then we'll start our general business. Thank you guys for coming. Really appreciate it. You look great.
Thank you. I knew I was.
Yeah, you did a great job.
Front of everything.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, Somerset. So
We can share. Just remember to mute everything.
Good job, Sawyer.
Yeah.
You did great.
Yeah.
Come anytime.
Come anytime. Thank you.
That was great. Sure, now. Yes.
You want me to unscrew them out?
No, you don't have a gun.
Crowd control for you.
I think once we get started.
I do anything to get out of our presentation, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. We do need somebody to stay.
food left over.
Yeah, there is. I told Mark that I didn't know it was there, but I had some. I was glad.
Sure. Left over.
We've got
I already had some.
a here that I'm too.
I was about to eat a granola bar.
Rusty.
Yeah, you bet.
I have my whole way of doing things. Yeah.
Babbitt, some of them last time. I bought like 200 pair or 100 pairs on Amazon.
Yeah.
I was gonna give out for our
Yeah,
kids.
yeah. Okay. So we're moving along. People, help yourself to food if you want food. We're gonna start with our regular meeting workshop. Item 2.1 on the Moab area transit update with Richard and Chuck. Ready to go?
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Richard and I will tag team this presentation a bit. We wanted to come to you to give you an update on our program, because really this is a program as opposed to a project, which is what I'm usually talking to you about. And we think there's some good information we've gleaned over the last 6 months. And part of this, I think, is a little bit celebratory because it's working so far. And I think the numbers will show you that it's working so far. I think it's exceeded at least our expectations, which were difficult to project. But what we'd like to do next, we've prepared an agenda which we'd like to suggest we follow. We'll start with a brief history, and then we'll do a review of the budget and funding. We'll do a bit of a preliminary analysis of peak season because it's not over yet, 2023. We'll talk about some service options that we discussed with our vendor, potentially for the upcoming non-peak season. Then we'll talk about that. And then, of course, there's an opportunity for discussion and input and direction from the council. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and move forward. You're good with that? Before we get into that, there's some key definitions, and I know council probably knows all of these, but I thought for the public, it would be good for us to reiterate this a little bit, just so we're all in the same, speaking the same lingo. Peak season. We've divided the service contract into a peak season and a non-peak season. The peak season is March 16th to October 15th. We started on time on March 16th, and we're going to finish the peak season on October 15th of this next month. And during the peak season, we're contracted now, and I guess I'd say that our contract was based upon our budget, and we'll get into that in a little bit about the budget, but we'd love to provide more services than what we have and potentially they're going to do in the non-peak season. But that would mean putting more money into the kitty. And really, this is a 5-year pilot program. So, you know, we've talked about it at the beginning that for this first year, let's collect the data. Let's see what the trends are. If there was some immediate adaptations we needed to make, we would do that. But there hasn't really been any that we've encountered. And I think the numbers will show you why I would say that. So I think part of it has been that I've been suggesting we stay patient while we collect data and find ways maybe we can improve the service. And if we want to do that, it might be scheduling changes next year or something along those lines. Or it might be, oh, let's expand and there's more money out there. But again, it's a pilot. And I wanted to emphasize that, you know, we're still learning information, and that's part of what we want to share tonight. So peak season, non-peak season is October 16th to March 15th. So we cover the whole calendar year from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Now, a nuance there is during the peak season, we have 7-day-a-week service, and during the non-peak season, we're only Monday through Friday. And you see there's reduced hours there. And again, this is a result of the study that we did and the contract we went out to bid RFP for. But during the non-peak season, there's only 2 micro transit vans, but no fixed route. So if you think about it, we're not only reducing the number of days and the number of hours, we won't have the fixed route downtown. And the theory beyond that, when we put together this budget, was we have less visitors, tourists in the winter than we do in the summer, spring, and fall. So that's why we found ways we wanted to try as robust a service as we could during those 3 seasons. That can all change, you know, next year as when we really look at all, we'll have a year's worth of data. So again, key definitions, peak and non-peak. Go ahead, please. Micro transit. It's an on-demand service. It's wheelchair accessible, and we do pickups and drop-offs anywhere within the service area. And we'll talk about the service area. And rides are requested through the Moab Area Transit app on your phone or by calling this 833 number. And then the fixed route is we have 19 stops that extend from Utah, basically Aggie Boulevard at the USU, all the way north to the river along the way, and we run both ways in a fixed loop. You don't have to call ahead. You can be standing at the stop and the van will stop and pick you up. So again, those definitions, because we'll be referencing them as we go through this, are important, we thought, to point out. Same type, I guess I'd say the same type of vehicle are used on the micro transit and the fixed route. So the orange and blue vans that we have, those work as micro transit and they work as the fixed route. Some places have different vehicles, but I think for our particular application, it's working out pretty well to have the same vehicles online. Okay. brief history of the timeline, and I know that some of the council members were here when it started and some weren't, so I thought we'd take a quick moment. In 2018, the Arches hotspot area, of which the city of Moab and Grand County are members, were allotted about $10 million worth of funding from the State Transportation Commission through UDOT. UDOT, Utah Department of Transportation, administers the funds for the legislature. And the legislature had some parameters around that hotspot funding. It was to decrease traffic congestion, increase economic development, and enhance recreational opportunities. Kind of a perfect fit for our community. Next. In 2021, after the dark year of COVID, dispersed parking and transit were the outcome of where the hotspot funding was to be spent. There was also some money sent to Grand County for a trail system, but we ended up with dispersed parking and transit. And also in 2021, it was determined that UDOT was going to contribute the hotspot funding $1.585 million. And it was agreed upon that it would be used for a 5-year pilot program. Rather than, oh, let's go dump it in, buy 10 vans and spend it all in year 1. And what are we gonna do for year 2? Because this is a no fare service. Those were decisions that were made by council at the time to make it a no fare service. So we have to live on the money that we have and we feel is forthcoming. And Richard will talk about that in a bit. Next. The transit study was undertaken by Fair and Peers, a consulting firm that is well recognized in the industry. And they took about a 6-month discussion. It was vetted through council and commission and UDOT. And it recommended service parameters because, you know, at the time, you know, the city had never done this before, the county had never done it before. So we had to rely on expertise from people who have done it before. I'd been exposed to it for a couple of years down in Phoenix, but it's not this much bigger system down there than here. So, and once everyone adopted that study, it had these peak and non-peak season concepts in there, microtransit. The system we operate now is basically based on that study. We did some tweaks. 2022, we did a request for proposals. We got 2 responses, which was good. And after evaluation process, we awarded council awarded to Downtowner LLC as a turnkey operator. So for clarity, again, staff manages a vendor. The people in those vans, the city doesn't own the vans, the drivers aren't city employees. We don't do maintenance on those vehicles. The vendor does maintenance on the vehicles, everything. And we just manage the contract. Next. And in 2023, the MAT service began in October 16th. The most council was there at the ribbon cutting ceremony that we held. And I think before we move on from this, I just would say that sometime, and I'm emphasizing that this is a program, not a project. It started in 2021. And we got from that point as a transit to 2023, that still was 2 years, right? But if you go back to where the hotspot funding started back in 2018, it's been 5 years to get where we're at today. So sometimes these things take a while to roll out. And I think in this particular case, that was worthwhile because I think we ended up with a product and a program that's viable, at least. My opinion. We'll interested to hear what council has to say. Next, please. I wanted to show you the service area map, but I thought I'd take the way we're going to do is rather than show you a PDF, we're going to do a hot link to our website. That's the URL. Should be popping up here in a second. No? It's the city's web. Oh, it's just the screen, right? So the website is got all the information you need. And we're going to show it here in a second. And I wanted to give a shout out to Lisa Church because she manages the website and she has all this information on here. And what Richard's showing you here is if you, he missed showing you the homepage, our city homepage. If you go to it right at the very top, right next to My Government, it says Moab Area Transit. You click on that link. Yeah, right there it is. That's the home, that's the city's homepage. You click on that and it takes you to this. And this information has how you contact us, the difference between on demand and fixed route, has contact information, Richard's number. It publishes the dates, times, and then there's the service area map, Richard. And so the service area, just want to talk about that for a moment. Yeah, will that pull up? I'm not sure, but we go from, yeah, there you go. It goes from essentially the Spanish Trail Arena to from the southern end up to the north to the Colorado River, which is our northern city boundary. And those yellow dots there represent the 19 stops for the fixed route service. And the green area are the service boundaries for the microtransit. So, you know, and we develop those boundaries with our downtown or looking at types of streets, timing of service, all went into that. It wasn't just straight lines, but essentially, as you can look on the west side of the valley, it's almost the western rim is our service area boundary. And on the east side, you know, there's some area there north and east of the golf course that's not included. And then of course, south of the arena that's not included. But people who are interested in using the service can either go directly to the app. They can go to our website, which Lisa's put together quite nicely, and find out that service area. So with that, I'll turn it to Richard to talk a little bit about budget next.
All right, thank you, Chuck. So now we're gonna go into budget. So as Chuck mentioned, we got some hotspot funding. And so really the total budget that we have for the 5 years, and this is spread out evenly throughout the 5 years, is $3,735,000. I put 1,500 here just for easy numbers. And it's split out, the UDOT hotspot money is split out over the 5-year period, with year 1 having 500K to year 5 having 100,000.
Can I like to say that was important that UDOT worked with us to let us front load their money because they had that money from the legislature. And we kind of had to find our local match, you know, it wasn't really budgeted. So that's why we start out high with UDOT's money, then trickle down to 100,000 near the end because we'll have other money funding coming in.
Yep. And so as that UDOT hotspot money trickles down, there's 700,000 for city, county, local. And in year 1, there's 0 match needed for UDOT hotspot. And then by year 5, picking up the brunt with 290,000. And then to further round out this number, we got some FTA ARPA. It's a COVID relief program, and 100 million, I wish, 1 million for that. And then prospective money, we have to apply for this FTA 5311 rural funding every year. And we hope to get by the end a total of 535,000 to round out the budget. And then, so yeah, we've started the season. We have a preliminary analysis. We have data from March 16th to August at the moment. In the future, we'll have a discussion about the full peak season, but for right now, we just have partial data. Moab Area Transit has serviced 29,000, almost 30,000 total passengers. It's going to be higher now since we have August data, but so 30K, and 27,555 or 92% is for microtransit. This comes through 18,386 requests, averaging about 1.5 per passengers per request. And then we also have an average of 36% requests shared, which meaning, you know, you request something somewhere, and then if someone else is on your route, they share the ride. And so 36% have been shared, but it's actually increasing. So the average doesn't reflect what the median is. And then 76 total wheelchair rides. Fixed route has serviced 2,262 overall, 8%.
Yeah, no, I wanted to point out, Richard and I were looking at the wheelchair rides today, and that's about 0.5% of our customers used wheelchair. Nationwide, the statistics are somewhere around 1% of the population is wheelchair bound. I think is the term that's used. So we're not that far off. I think that we're part of the reason we don't meet the 1% is that we're such a remote location that people who come here and who are wheelchair bound probably have it all sorted out in their minivan or their Suburban or something. So they get to their hotel and it's like, I'd rather go in my ride to the restaurant than, figure out this van. But the fact that we have 0.5% tells me that locals who are wheelchair bound are using that. I mean, certainly there could be some tourists there, but I think that's in our analysis. We're thinking that we're serving the local folks with that. And we think that's a good thing.
Let's see. And then, so total passengers from March to August, if we break it up into months, it looks like this. The significant drop at low point in March is again because it was a new service. It was only had 2 weeks to, add ridership in March. The blue is microtransit. The orange is fixed route ridership. You can see that in May, fixed route ridership peaked and microtransit passengers peaked in June, and now everything's kind of leveled out a bit. Be interesting what September says and the first 2 weeks of October as we get into maybe the busy tourist season again. Total microtransit requests. So this is just microtransit by day of the week. Sunday is the lowest. Monday is the highest. But as you can see, there's pretty much demand all week. There's not really a down day. And then if we go by hour, and we again adding in fixed route in the orange, 9 a.m. is the peak for the microtransit passengers, with 6 p.m., 3 p.m. being the other ones. Fixed route peaks around 5 p.m. And I kind of think this correlates with the wait times that have that occur with microtransit when you get into the really busy hours.
So when we look at the data, the 9 a.m. peak, and as we've talked to some of the passengers, the users of the system, that's people going to work, essentially. Maybe some folks going to breakfast, but what we hear is that. And then when you look at the 5 to 6 p.m., remember our parking study that we did back in 18, identified through a bunch of detailed work that the most demand for parking in Moab is during the dinner hour. And anyone who's gone down during the peak season and tried to get downtown parking knows that. So I think that that's what's happening there with the 5 to 6 p.m. are people who are wanting to go to dinner saying, I don't want to try and fight for parking. Possibly some people getting off work. I'm not really sure how many outside of government employees, how many 8 to 5 jobs there are. I mean, I know there's some, but service industry is, could be 6 a.m. till 10 at night, right? For restaurants and hotels. But we think that the morning is go to work and the afternoon is, so those are important customers for us. And again, though, I think as Richard pointed out, I just would reiterate, because we're going to move on from numbers here, but there's some consistency, right? I mean, from a statistical standpoint, yeah, 219 at 3 p.m. is greater than 210 at 4 p.m., but it's the same, really, it's in the same ball. It's not even ballpark. It's really close standard deviation on that. And, when we're in this 2000s to 2500, there's a lot of consistency to this data that once people found out about the system, they seem to be using the system, is I think the conclusion that we're drawing. And I'm not saying it's the same people every day, but it seems to be, might be a lot of the same people every day because the numbers are relatively consistent.
All right, and then here is a heat map of, this is a combination. I just wanted to keep it simple, just have one map. So this is a combination of pickups and drop-offs. When you see them separate, it's pretty much the same map. And what that tells me is that people are going from A to B back to A. But you see a large red blob in downtown, the downtown area, that's Main Street. If you go west of that, there's another red blob, and I think that might be the hospital. As you go north of it, the other high density spots are hotels.
Can you explain the difference between request and pass?
Yeah, I guess I should explain the difference between a request and a passenger, because again, this is requests here. So this doesn't necessarily reflect passengers. This is, you know, showing a person requesting for one passenger, a person requesting for 10 passengers. So perhaps a high passenger requests go elsewhere, but I think it's reasonable to assume that they go to the same areas in general.
Is that lower southwest blob, is that the university?
So the universe, I don't know if my university is like green one. That one is the university.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
The reason why that might not be, you know, a red spot is that the fixed route does also go there. That's the southern terminus for the fixed route. So, and then, of course, the southern terminus down here, way down here is Spanish Trail Arena.
And one of the things about, because we had to really get clarity on this, working with our vendor. You might ask, why are there difference between requests and passengers? As an example, you know, I've been on the system maybe 5 times being secret shopper, right? See how it's going. And one time I wanted to go at like 6:30 on a Friday night to my friend's house for dinner. And it said, wait time is 65 minutes. Average wait time is 19. Is that what we came up with, Richard, over there?
Let's see, I didn't add the actual graph, but 30-minute wait time is an average around this peak hours.
Yeah, peak hours. So when I saw 65 minutes, I was like, oh, I must have fat fingered the app or something. Well, I punched it in 3 times over 5 minutes. Then I decided to drive because didn't meet my schedule, right? And all I'm saying for clarity is all 3 of those attempts on my part to get information count as a request. Whereas passengers are actually people who get on the vans. It's close enough. Yeah. Yeah, demand. Okay.
All right. So we think that the service was a success for peak season. And as you saw, the numbers are pretty consistent throughout the day. And of course, it's hard to predict what non-peak season demand will be. But we wanted to explore options to expand what the non-peak season service looks like. We discussed with Downtowner, talked about split schedules, such as a mid-morning service break, or ways that we could add additional days, and talk about budget. And a lot of this, we couldn't come to a conclusion on how to best do this. And I think it's going to be a discussion for later seasons. And yeah. An alternative was found for this season. And so when we come back, we'll come back in the future in a few months after we have some non-peak season data, we have the full peak season, and we'll discuss future seasons then. And then to finish it off, we'll talk about what the peak season is now, and then we'll open up to discussion. Non-peak. It begins October 16th. Again, as Chuck said, in the history, it's informed by the transit study, the RFP, and has to deal with, what perceived demand would be and what we could do with the budget. 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Monday to Friday, only microtransit. And that concludes March 15th with peak season 2024 starting March 16th. And then that's all we have.
Be happy to answer any questions or council may have.
Have you guys, is Downtowner, what is their feedback been? Have they told you any weaknesses or things that they would like changed and things, or are they?
Well, we've had discussions, we meet with them every 6 weeks, unless there's a reason to meet more often. And we're looking into the future. So into the future for the peak season, we're really wondering, I think the number was 7% or 9% is fixed route. Help me, Richard.
About 9%.
So 9% of the passengers are fixed route and 90 or 91% are micro transit, which tells us that the micro transit service is really popular. The fixed route isn't get used as much as we thought it was going to get. So what they're saying is we ought to talk about that once all the data is in. And that's what we're talking about is let us get the data in through October 16th. We'll come back to council after the first of the year because we'll have a couple of months of non-peak in there as well. So we'll be able to look at it. And they're suggesting, well, we ought to look at that fixed route and maybe modify it somehow. No decisions by, or even any recommendations yet by them or us.
And when we were discussing changes to the hours, 8 AM was one that seemed like a pretty reasonable one that we want to shoot for in the future. Again, if that's needed in the non-peak season with a lot of restaurants and whatnot, businesses closing, we don't know, but
Right.
the data will tell. And so maybe 8 AM, that's another one.
Are there industry metrics that you can compare the current performance with, either to evaluate success on its own or that might come into play when you go for federal money?
From downtowners' point of view, we're definitely in a unique position. And I went to a conference recently, a transit conference, and I met a lot of other transit organizations, and all of them are, at least 30,000 people plus. So with a small location like we have, it's kind of hard to determine those right now. And certainly the peak season data, and I guess the metrics would be we want to improve upon this last season.
Mhm. And it seems like there's a little bit of in trying to interpret from just the raw data that you have, what the motivations are and like where the gaps might be. And I'm wondering, since many people access it by an app, would it be useful, and is it possible to do a survey of the riders, either like when they're requesting a ride or maybe like at a single point, like to all the people who have downloaded the app?
Yeah, we've talked about that with Lisa and with Downtowner about doing it. And I think that's part of what we're going to do over the winter as it comes up is, we like to do a citywide survey. Lisa has that new bang the table tool that she's got. And we think that might be a mechanism to do that, to both educate people and promote the service as well as get feedback. So we're planning to do that. Right now, we're operating on information back from the drivers because they're talking to the people, a lot. It's like, like when I have written it, I'm like, so what do you think we could do to improve it? Well, we get a lot of people saying they'd like to be there at 8 o'clock. Other people are like, yeah, it's working good. Just don't stop. and that's been a lot of the feedback that I've heard from the drivers.
Yeah, I'm wondering what degree of granularity you have in terms of the data. Because I'm really interested at the proportion of locals versus tourists that are using it. Because I was thinking if you could potentially do by destination, there's certain addresses that we know are very likely going to be locals. And I don't know what kind of information the MAT app collects. I don't know if there's a zip code tied to your credit card or something that we might be able to reference but no, it's free. So there's no
Free, yeah.
for it. And I think we'll see a little bit of this in the off season where it'll primarily be those year-round local residents that I think are going to be using the service. But when I was thinking, yes, although individually, I think most employers probably don't follow that 8 to 5 work schedule. But when I think about the largest employers in our community, where it's the city, the hospital, the school district, the county, Synergy, and all of that, they have much more standard business hours. And those are also the jobs that generally are going to have the year-round employment as well. So I'd be really interested to see just the breakdown in terms of the locals that are using it, because I think that to me would really have an impact on the way that we potentially approach funding these things, because to a certain degree, if locals are being forced to move further away from downtown because of cost of living and everything like that, maybe we can kind of help offset the cost of locals using it by increasing like charges for tourists, because the locals have been burdened by having to like travel more to be able to like get to their workplaces or.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Richard, I don't know if you know more about the destination than I do in terms of what our data shows. We talked about this at the beginning of the service. I don't know, I don't know if we talked about the council, but with downtown, or one of the things we didn't want to get into doing was showing identifications, right? To get on the van, because we thought that would be a negative. Yeah, we know when we've been to hotels, right, and where we drop them off, and you can make that assumption, but yet there's staff that could be there. In fact, some of that's regularity, some of the hours, it seems like.
Well, and
I hear what you're saying.
I'd love to like be able to see just like an Excel pool of it, because if there's like one ride to the same address every single day, like at the same time, you kind of know that's a local probably going to work.
Yeah.
Like, and so I think even if we don't have like the degree of detail that maybe we would like, there's still a lot of info in there that would help us at least get a general idea of what the ratios are.
Yeah, we definitely have the GPS data of where they are. First thing in mind, could be a privacy issue. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe, I don't know. But we could probably, I'll for sure ask downtown if we could start breaking down locations and destinations and.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, they've been good with working with us as we've asked, as staff has asked for different types of data, some of which we gave you in the packets, right? But we'll definitely follow up with that and see if we can come up to some more detailed analysis on that. Right now, I don't think we have it ready to show you.
So I realize a lot of the feedback we've gotten, like we have a sense that we have seniors and youth using this is probably from personal interaction, right? Discussions you probably had, Richard, or the two of you have had. I'm just curious. One of the things we wondered when we started this was, I wonder if, businesses will be vying or, jealous, of your neighbor if they have a stop and you don't, or vice versa. And I was just curious, have we gotten any feedback from either additional businesses who'd like a stop, or some saying, the stop is not really working out? I was just curious.
I've gotten feedback from hotels
Okay.
wanting stops at them. Because again, during those peak hours when the wait times are pretty high, the option of maybe a stop coming up to you, coming to your place of business is definitely intriguing. So I've had this requests for that. Otherwise, the only request I've had is for like in the app for their names, their business names to be put into in the app. We have like a list of locations that you can ask to get picked up and dropped off at. And we've been pretty good with getting pretty much every business in town on that. So
Okay, yeah, and outside of that, I'm just curious, have there been requests from residents about, every day I need to go here, or I need to go here often, and would you guys think about putting a stop here?
as far as stops go, no, microtransit service area, there's
Okay, so
certainly
expanding
demand
the
for.
service area, that kind of question.
yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
the 19 stops that we have on the fixed route, that's the only place where we have bus stops, if
Yeah.
you will, right?
Yeah.
And we've got the signs out there and they're numbered. But part of that was designed with Downtowner, the number of stops, so that we could make the loop
Yeah.
in basically an hour.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm not saying it's 60 minutes on the nose, because if people are getting on, or if there's a red lights, it can delay us a few minutes, but pretty much it was designed for that. So we could have a reasonable loop, as opposed if we loaded it up with 40 stops
Yeah.
with the amount of vans we have, which is one for the
Yeah.
fixed route, we'd be in basically a 2-hour loop.
Yeah.
So if you were northbound, you're fine, but if you're southbound, you're waiting for 2 hours. So we thought that having some shorter wait times would be beneficial.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I think it was more like, because we don't see the input that you guys do or the feedback. So it was more like, oh, okay, did we miss the mark? Or we, missing a total area, or we got too much going on in one.
Though that will be, once we have this season's peak season's date
Yeah.
in, and we'll drill down and try and get some of the information all the information we can get, actually, and this is good input from council. Then we'll come back with that data. We'll share it with you, and then we can talk about next season. If maybe there's a few stops we want to modify, as an example,
Yeah.
because they're not getting the usage. We have a couple, like what is the real busy one, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. One of the busiest ones is where the World Mark and the
Element.
Element are, yeah. That's what happens when they change names during development. But that's a real, but you know, we kind of anticipated that because you got a 200 unit resort and then a 150 unit hotel and they funnel to that spot. That's all walkable from there. So that's kind of one of our busiest fixed route stops.
Yeah, one suggestion, I mean, I wanted to support Luke in his desire for more data on locals versus visitors, but one suggestion for some of those hotspots you had is because some of those hotspots probably, I know some of those places when they built, they told us, oh, you know, we're going to be a low service location. So, you know, we aren't going to have a very big staff. So it probably would be pretty easy. I don't know how many people would be willing, but you know, you might have, the staff might be small enough that they might be willing to tell you, yes, I use this to get to work or not. And that'll be a pretty easy way to find out like, yeah, okay, this is 95%
Yeah.
visitors who are using this stop. But just a few questions. I've gotten a few questions from residents and I either couldn't remember or I never knew. And one was, in terms of the outreach and getting the word out about the service, I couldn't remember, do we know, was the county able to put any TRT funds into this? I didn't know if it would qualify, but it does seem like, you know, it's a service that makes for a more pleasant experience for a visitor and it is serving a large number of visitors. So I just didn't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the county has committed thus far for $250,000 for the entire program.
I knew they had committed funds, but do you know, is any of that TRT?
I imagine is coming from
Okay,
TRT.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
I know that when we had the discussions with
Yeah.
Chris Baird, he
Yeah.
said, I think TRT could be used for
Okay,
this.
okay, great. I'll pass it
So
on.
ultimately where it comes from, I don't know, but that would be my
Yeah.
recommendation.
And I know when we initially had the discussions about approving it, we did have discussions at the time about like, okay, you know, there's a reason this is a 5-year pilot. And if it really looks like, you know, it's not getting much use, it probably doesn't make much sense to continue it. But I think like these guys, it would help me to have some parameters to understand what numbers are making this a success. So I know it says in our strategic plan that that's one of the things that's supposed to happen: internal measurements of success, customer satisfaction, usability, efficiency of operations, participation rates, and then I'm sure numbers too. So I'm guessing no one's had time, right, to establish those yet, right? But that'll come in the
Yeah,
coming year.
I mean,
Yeah,
going back to the
Yeah.
genesis of it.
yeah,
You know, we, in discussions with UDOT, because UDOT was part of the discussion too, right? They were funding this. They thought that having the service open to locals, because that, we asked that question back then, we discussed it, right? All of us, is it just for locals? Is it just for tourists? And the answer was, no, it's for everybody who needs a ride,
yeah,
who we can provide a ride to. And that was part of consistent with the legislature's economic development, recreational opportunities and traffic congestion goals that they had for everybody in hotspot funding. So that's why we didn't make a distinction back then, we being council as the decision makers, but as a working group, to say, okay, locals are free, tourists pay $5. And I'm just picking a number. I'm not saying that's the number. But in the future, you could certainly do that. What we agreed upon was let's get the first year's worth of data. But in the first year, we said, let's find out what the demand really is by making it no fare.
yeah. No, my idea, my understanding was that it would always be low fare, but that might just be me because I thought
What-
that's what we were going for. But
Yeah. And the 5-year program's designed for that.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting we
Yeah.
make a change. I'm just saying though that
yeah.
it could happen if council and commission.
Yeah, no,
wanted to.
my memory was more rooted in, I can't remember with the hotspot funds, if they, because they're giving us money in part theoretically to reduce congestion. I couldn't remember if there were any hard numbers on what progress we're expected to make, but okay,
No, not like the dispersed. I see what you're saying. Like
Yeah.
dispersed parking was number of parking stalls, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there was, from UDOT, my recollection is there's no, you got to have 2,000 riders a day,
okay.
which we're exceeding, by the way, that number. No, there was none of that. I think at this time, UDOT's very happy with the program.
Yeah.
I would say, Richard, would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. And also on terms of performance metrics, we did put into the contract some like wait times
Yeah,
and ride times. What those were based on is up to 100 passengers a day, which we are exceeding. We want those wait times to remain low. And, you know, obviously if 20,000 people want to use it in a day, it's hard to keep to the performance metrics. So we just made it based on a certain amount of riders per day. And then if it's under that, we want to keep it to a short wait time.
Yeah, I know some of the initial questions we were thinking through when we were getting started was like, oh, okay, what about maintenance? And that's one reason it's good to have 3 vehicles instead of 2, like if one breaks down, or I can't remember if we have 4 total. Have we had any maintenance issues?
We have 4.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, well,
Yeah.
and then we've had 2 minor fender benders
okay,
that, you know.
Yeah.
Our contract says you will keep the vehicles tip-top shape,
mhm,
maintained, and actually I have to tell you, the federal fund, and when you receive, you know, I always say there's no such thing as free money. When the federal funds come in, they have these criteria for reports we wouldn't want to do. I mean, when do you change the tires? You know, but when was your last brake check? All that stuff the downtowner has to provide those information for the feds to give us the money, which is great. I mean, those are safety protocols, right? But it's very thorough and detailed. But yes, we do have 4 vans, and you know, and so we clipped in the 3rd one when the other ones go to the shop to get the fender repaired, or for even regular routine maintenance, you know, or you know, might be a scheduled maintenance or a recall. So yeah, I think that going with the 4 vans was a good move on our part. Even though it might seem like a little bit much, but if we had 3, we'd be really skinny
yeah,
in terms of being able to provide the service in the event of something happening.
yeah. I was also curious, is one thing we deal, like, say, when we talk on the EMS board is, you know, we might have a call, say to Green River, and you head up there, and then midway through, or maybe when you get there, somebody cancels it. And I just wasn't sure, do we know if that's happened much? Like where people, you know, maybe made a micro transit call and then the driver gets there to look for them and they aren't there. I wasn't sure, you know, how standard that is in the industry, but also what we're seeing.
Oh yeah, it happens.
Uh,
It's about 100, let's say 110 a month.
Okay,
There's
okay,
no shows and
okay.
yeah.
Okay,
and a lot of that can be maybe wait times and then they just forget that they made the order or whatnot. So what happens is the driver will go to the location,
yeah,
they'll wait there, they'll make some calls, and after a few attempts, they'll
Yeah.
get going.
okay,
It happened on one of my rides where we stopped, they were going to pick somebody else up, pulled up, honked the horn because that's what she was a regular customer, if you will, and that's what she was used to hearing was the honk the horn. She didn't come out, he called, she didn't answer the phone, we waited another minute and then we left. Because something else had happened, you know.
okay. And I guess maybe last question, because we all know about our housing issue. Do we know, has Downtowner been able to stay staffed? I don't know what their total staff is, but, and maybe that's not public information.
Yeah, I won't speak to it too much, but
Yeah,
they've been good so far. Like we haven't had to drop the service at all. And
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, we understand they provide insurance for their staff. It's not like they're paying contract wages. I'm not saying they have a fully loaded benefit package, but they do have some benefits that they report that some people like to have at the regular job hours, plus a little bit of benefits locals. So
Okay,
yeah, staffing hasn't seemed to be, and is it somewhere between 7 and 10 drivers?
Somewhere between 7 and 10. And when we talk about like benefits and whatnot, they're all there's a mix of part-time and full-time as well in there.
Okay. okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
Do you know how many miles they've driven total?
Microtransit, each van gets about 6,000 a month. So about 5 months and maybe it's around 35,000 a month. It's more like 7 months now, I guess, but
But is that each van or?
yeah, each van is 6,000 a month. And then the fixed route is about 5,000 a month. So,
Like 29,000 miles a month.
so they're moving. It'd be great from my point of view to get electric. That'd be
Yeah,
fantastic.
Someday, and you have that option in the future at some
Yeah,
point.
they said they would definitely look at it in the future in in their response to the RFP, but it's hard to get electric full size. It was hard to get those full size vans. They had one of the advantages of going with them is because they were an established firm. They had connections to get those vans off the assembly line because it's difficult even now to get new larger vehicles there. But once those vehicles cycle out, which might be 2 years, might be 3 years, but I think it's going to be 2.5 years. Yeah, we'll be encouraging them to go with electric vehicles.
Any other questions? Would you guys mind just repeating for the press and for the public, the hours for non-peak season?
The non-peak season beginning October 16th will be 2 microtransit vehicles running from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday,
Great. And that is till March 15th.
up till March 15th,
All right, very good.
in which case we start the peak season over
Right,
again.
exactly. And so we'll be probably hearing again from you guys in January.
Yep.
With the new council on board and getting some feedback from them on how we want to maybe look at the peak season for next year. Right.
I have one last nice PR suggestion for you guys. Maybe we could give an award to our 2 or 3 top riders to acknowledge them, because I'm guessing we have some regular riders.
I do like that. That's a good idea.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, next up, we have our public comment period. If you're interested in making a public comment, please fill out a form, which are up here, and provide them to me. Just as a reminder, there's a 3-minute limit per person for comments. If you're here to talk about anything that's on the agenda, if you could identify, this is your opportunity to talk about agenda items, and just identify when you introduce yourself that you're talking regarding the item that's on the agenda. And then Summer will keep track of that in the minutes. So public comments. You have a comment? Yeah. Yeah, bring this up. Well, you can fill it out and give it to us later. So
Okay.
but just introduce yourself.
Gonna read off.
Have a seat so that we can get you on the mic.
Hello, Council. My name's Alex. I live on the corner of 100 North and 300 East, and came out here to talk about our street parking outside of our house. So we live on a pretty wide street that's residential only, dead end. And we typically park nose in front of the house, in front of the doorway. And the street is wide enough where it doesn't really interfere with 2-way traffic, even with parallel parking on the other side, which is rarely used as the neighbor has a driveway. And a few weeks ago, our house got notices saying we must park parallel to the curb from code enforcement, and we were to receive citations. So we've changed our parking to comply because we don't want to get a ticket in front of our house or get our car impounded. And so, yeah, we changed our parking, comply with city code, but given the location and benefits of the parking nose in, we'd like to request that the city assist us in making this allowable. I've spoken with the assistant city engineer, Mark, and he says that our way of parking nose in makes sense for that street. It's not, again, it's not a through street, it's a dead end, it's for mostly residential. And he said that maybe we can incorporate lines in front of our house for parking with the new parking designation coming up, but it's not really a priority. So I just kind of came here today to see if we could officially get parking lines in front of our house with that new parking project coming up. And also to see if we could park nose in to the curb until then and just not get cited. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Any other comments? All right, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is a department update with David. Where is David? Is he online? Oh,
David's on TV.
oh, there you are. You look a
Hello.
lot different than you did this afternoon. All right, David is here to give us a closeout for fiscal year 22-23 on our budget and other items on regarding finances. This is item 4.1 on our agenda. All right, David.
Good evening, council. I was just going to talk through a few documents that you should have paper copies of in front of you. These will also be posted onto the city's website at the budget and audits on the budgets and audits page shortly, if not tomorrow morning at the latest. We basically have 4 documents. You have a sort of a summary sheet of the budget and actuals for the fiscal year 23, which ended in June 30th of 23. You've got a detail of all of that information behind it. That's Polaris, which is the city's accounting and budgeting software, a printout from Polaris. That one is 40 pages, hence the need for a summary sheet. And then there are also two other documents for the new fiscal year that we're in to get us back on track to doing monthly, essentially profit and loss statements for you to see. So we have one for July and one for August. And then on a quarterly basis, we'll be producing a report that's more of a balance sheet type of report, which would include assets and liabilities, as well as the standard sort of how much money has been spent out of each line item in the current budget that we're in. So let's go back to fiscal year 22-23. If you look at that top sheet, the one that says fiscal year 22-23 final budget and actuals, you'll see that under the revenue section, the city came in at about 93% of its budgeted revenue amounts. Taxes, sales taxes, highway taxes, the TRT, those came in right at 92%. Licenses and permits really carried the day in terms of being exceeding revenue projections, as well as interest payments. So, or interest revenue, I should say. Not too shocking considering how much interest rate hikes went up that past year. Moving through just really quickly, I'll just go through a few things and then open it up for questions if that's okay.
That's fine.
Great. So general government, that's all the departments that most people interact with outside of public safety. You'll see that they came in just a little bit under budget as well. Public safety was right at budget, about 99%. That includes just the way that the city is historically classified departments and functions. Public safety does include the attorney's office, as well as the inspection services in planning. So there's a public safety nexus there. So I think that's why that's traditionally been there. But then in highway and public improvements, streets, sanitation, facilities, that type of thing, came in right at budget, a little bit over, just a touch. And then parks came in significantly under, actually. But a lot of that was because the community contributions piece, which is considered part of that parks and public property part of the budget. A lot of that money was collected as revenue, but wasn't spent through the RAP tax process. So that's why you see those numbers there. The bottom line there is that the city ended up in a nice favorable position in the general fund to the tune of about $700,000 in the plus. So that's a nice thing to see. We didn't generate as much revenue as we thought, but we didn't spend as much as we thought is the bottom line. That's really probably I'd say the most sort of salient part of the budget with regard to what fiscal year 23 looked like. The roads fund looked good in terms of bringing in a little more revenue than was spent. The recreation fund, as usual, is not a fund that pays for itself. The city general fund tends to subsidize that fund to the tune of about $1 million each year, and that was no different this year as well. And so while it says that the total change in net position for the recreation fund was about $556,000 in the negative, when you factor in that we didn't actually transfer all the money in that would have normally been shown as revenue from the general fund, the bottom line is it was still about $1 million subsidy there. Let's see, moving around just a little bit further in on, say, is this page 1, 2, page 4, you've got the capital projects fund. And that one shows a big negative number in terms of the change in net position too, but I wanted to be sure to flag that one for clarification. That is because UDOT funding for hotspot projects, for the dispersed parking projects, comes to the city after it submits receipts for reimbursement. And so the money was spent in the fiscal year 23, but we didn't get the reimbursement until just last month. So it'll show up in fiscal year 24. So the reality is the capital projects fund is fine in terms of its balance and its health. And this is the reason why you do maintain fund balances, so that when money gets spent in one year and you get reimbursed in another, you've got a little bit of a cushion in your fund balances to make it all work. In terms of the enterprise funds, water, sewer, and stormwater, all looking very healthy at this time, generating a bit more revenue than they're spending, which is good because that allows for those enterprise funds to bank funds for future capital projects and or unexpected expenditures. And yeah, I'd say that those are really the highlights for fiscal year 22-23. Again, at the end of the day, just to take it all into one or two numbers, at the very bottom of the summary sheet, you'll see these two rows. And one is the total net position of change in citywide, and that citywide with all the funds included, and that shows about a $1.2 million change to the good, to the plus. If you take out the enterprise funds, however, it shows about a negative $900,000 change. And that again does not reflect that reimbursement from UDOT coming in, which was about $1.6 million. So between those two, if you did the math there, it ends up being about a $700,000 gain to the plus. Now, next year, we have to remember, or the year we're in, we have to remember to have that same conversation so that we're not double counting money in terms of thinking about what the fund balances are, or in terms of what the net position is. But at the end of the day, when you look at fund balances, they all are in generally very good shape.
Great. Thanks, David. Questions for David?
David, remind me on the recreation fund, what is the difference between intergovernmental revenue and transfers in?
Generally, I'll look at the detail really quickly to make sure I'm saying the right thing, but generally intergovernmental revenue would be revenue in from, in that case, the Recreation Special Service District. And maybe Grand County contributes separately to as well. Let me just double check, see where we're at.
Yeah, there's, we have interlocal agreements with the recreation district and school district
Right.
for funding.
And so
Right.
if that's the case, why was the actual so much less than budgeted? If those were based on pre-existing agreements?
So one should be for, I think, 75,000 and another is for the bond payment, the loan payment. I don't know if loan shows up somewhere else.
Actually, and for both of those in the fiscal year 23, the Grand County contribution and the school district contributions came in. This is a little bit different in the recreation fund because it shows the city of Moab as also an intergovernmental revenue source, and that's the one that is where the deficit's at. In other words, the budget that you all approved was for a $1.3 million contribution from the city of Moab into the recreation fund. Ended up only transferring from the general fund to the recreation fund about $461,000. So that's why there's a gap of about $840,000 in terms of the total intergovernmental revenue. Now, typically you do see that you see that transfer from the general fund to another fund in the transfer section, like you noted. But what the only item that's in the transfer subsection, I guess you could say, of the revenue is the fund balance for the recreation fund and what it would contribute into the budget for that year. And that was about $250,000. That's always like a kind of a, I don't know what the right term is. It's not a slush fund per se, but the fund balance for the specific fund that you're talking about is what you use to basically balance the budget at the end of the day, to reconcile the numbers if you need to, right? And so that was not needed in this case because of the other funding sources that came through for the most part. And we showed it as actually a negative in terms of net position. So it's a little bit of like, you could either do all these transfers at the end of the day to show it on paper as balancing, or you can say, well, we know that it's going to be a subsidy of, you know, $1 million. And so, you know, we don't need to do that. We just acknowledge that that's what it is. The money, the actual cash and where the cash lives and what it doesn't change for those things. That's a very long-winded answer. Was that helpful?
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions for David?
Were we going to go to the July through August paperwork. Otherwise, I just had a question about it. Obviously, thanks for noting on there. It's always helpful to know, okay, that's 16.6% of the fiscal year expired. You know, I know in the community and probably amongst ourselves in our own brains, you know, we're always thinking taxes and looking at those numbers. And so on the revenue side, it shows the percent earned and expended, the total, I think it's 22.37%. So, you know, in a simplistic form of thinking, you'd think, oh, cool, we're up on taxes. But I know a lot of that can have to do with when payments come in. So I was just going to ask you guys, is there anything I should know about, like, you know, do we think we're on track? Do we think we're a little ahead, a little behind? Yeah.
You're correct. And I will also preface it by saying, having only 2 months worth of revenue data or even expenditure data it's really hard to extrapolate from that no matter what. So, and given the seasonality of income, you know, and revenue as it comes in from tax revenue, it's not going to be the same amount every month, right? Obviously. So it's very variable is the point there. To your question though, I would say that just looking at our sales tax revenues and TRT revenues that have come in for the first 2 months compared to what those revenues were a year ago, were up comparatively. What we have not seen are the revenues from taxes from the month of August itself. Like, so if somebody was staying at a hotel in August and they paid the TRT, we haven't seen that yet. And I think that's going to be the one that maybe is a little bit of a correction in terms of you know, whether revenues stay up or not. But for the first 2 months for the actual first 2 months of receipts, you know, it is looking good compared to the year before.
Can I just ask you just a health self-education thing, but maybe something for the community to moving forward, and maybe it's good for the folks running for office. You know, a lot of time we have the discussion in the community about oh, well, how can your sales tax be up because mine is down? And, you know, sometimes you sit back at night and you think through, okay, well, what factors could explain that scenario? And it seems like depending on a person's situation, there could be a few. Like in the city's case, we're getting sales tax, we're getting TRT, we're getting income from a few different places. So, whereas one, say, service sector in the community might not be doing so well and another one's doing well, we kind of, tell me if I'm wrong, but we're kind of benefiting from the average or the whole pot there. Whereas if I had an individual business and I either have experienced more competition in the last few years or a lesser demand for my particular service, maybe it sounds weird when the city is up, but I personally could be down. Is that too simplistic of a way to reference it? And are there other factors, obvious ones that I'm missing? Those are the ones I think of at 3 a.m.
No, I think you nailed it. I think that's exactly
Okay.
right. I mean, the city's sales tax revenues are the aggregate of all the businesses. And so if there's one business selling burritos, you know, last year, now there's 3. The one business probably is selling fewer burritos, but the 3 businesses in total are going to be selling a lot more burritos probably. So the city gets the benefit of all the burritos.
Okay. Do communities ever do a deeper dive into that? Or is that usually something that an individual business or a chamber or a travel counselor maybe looks at, or something maybe an interesting reporter looks at? I mean, it sounds like those are probably the factors. So it probably maybe isn't a dive is not necessary, but I was just curious.
Yeah, you know, I think I've seen more detail around like which sectors of the business community are doing better or worse. You know, that kind of stuff I remember seeing more related to, like, as part of the economic development work that the county had done historically. So we don't typically, I think on the city side, have gotten into that too much.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. No, maybe we just throw it out there. Think about multiple parameters. Think about, competition. Think about, sectors. Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions for David? All right. We will get a quarterly report at our second meeting in October. So you guys can see where we're going for the first part of this year. Thanks, David. He's such a rebel. All right, next up is a presentation by Michael regarding our grant opportunities update. So at our last meeting, it was requested that we present primarily what we're doing with the RCOG grant, but also I thought it was a really good opportunity for the council and the community to get a sense of all the grants that we've applied for in the last couple of years and the successes we've had and what we're applying for this year, just so you all have a clear picture of what we've been doing. And Richard is our grant writer. Not only does he do transit, but he's our grant writer, and he's done an excellent job this year in getting us grants. And I think Michael will go into that. I also want to clarify for the council as well that, one of the requests you guys asked for was some information about RCOG. You wanted some information about dispersed parking. And we'll talk a little bit about that, the application we're going to make for that. And also referencing the downtown plan, which was great. I didn't even know we had a downtown plan, but apparently in 2018, there was a plan. I think Rachel, you worked on that. And it was never adopted by the council. But, you know, I looked through it and surprisingly, there was a lot of things that we've accomplished, that we've implemented. So even though that plan wasn't officially adopted, there was a lot of things that we were able to implement. Dispersed parking is one of those. So I thought that was very interesting. And I did want to clarify for you that in case you weren't aware, that the Economic Development Advisory Board is a county board. It is advises the Grand County Commission on economic development opportunities. Michael is our city rep on that board. So Carly used to be, but now with Michael, he's participated in those meetings. And I also wanted, in case people weren't aware, let you know that the county just did hire a new economic development director, Ben Frederick-Gill, who I know personally, great guy. I think he's going to do a really good job. He just started, I think, last week. So he's just getting his feet under him and getting settled in. And I know Michael plans to meet with him and see if there's opportunities where we can collaborate with the city and county on opportunities in the future. So also, just so you know, we're going to, on the agenda tonight, Carly is going to review the strategic plan. You guys are going to hopefully consider adopting the resolution and approving that plan. And that kind of gives you a refresher of all the projects and initiatives that you agreed to move forward with for this coming year, which helps guide staff and grant opportunities to apply for. So Michael.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to emphasize that today we're going to be talking mainly about one grant, but at the end of the presentation, I will be giving some information generally about all the grants that have been awarded over the past few years, or all the grants that are in process, or projects that are in process that are funded partially through grants. And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute here, if I can get my screen to move. Okay, so the grant we're talking about today is the Rural Communities Opportunity Grant, and that's from the state of Utah. It's basically for economic development needs in our part of the state. And you can spend that money, which is up to $600,000 if you're awarded that money, for infrastructure, capital facilities improvements, as long as they relate to business development. Now, this grant is not unlike all other grants. It requires matching funds, and it's about 20%. It's based on your population. I talked to Richard today, who was our grant specialist, and we're estimating it's probably going to be 20% of the grant amount. So 20% of 600,000 if we were awarded all of that money. The application period opens in October. Right now it's open for letters of interest, and we are planning to work on getting in a letter of interest before it closes, so that we can get some early consideration and conference with the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity before we actually submit the application, and it closes November 17th. Like I said, we can apply up to $600,000. The time frame for completion, I know this was one of the questions. Once the contract is signed, they want the project completed at their funding in 24 months. And the grant comes in, the distribution of funds comes in at 90-10 split, which is 90% once the contract is signed and 10% after substantial completion or completion of the project. So that's the basics of the actual grant that we're looking at. And we're going to talk about what we'll be applying that to in just a minute if we were to be awarded that. But the grant criteria that the state will be evaluating our grant against and all the other grants that come in is whether or not we have an effective strategic economic development plan. Now, as we go through these, every one of these that we can check, we will be a stronger candidate for, but we don't need to meet all of these in order to apply. But the more we can show we comply with more of these, the better applicants we're going to be. Obviously, as far as the strategic economic development plan, we're going to want to show that we have priorities and that this is consistent. This plan that we're going for is consistent with those economic development priorities. And we're going to have to show an economic need if we are to produce a grant, which I think we can do. We're going to show that we have utilized local financial resources in the grant or the project we're looking at. That is definitely the case. Job creation is always a factor in these, and they want to see that you're going to get a positive return on investment if this were to be implemented. So those are all things that we will have to hit on if we are to apply, when we apply for this, I'm sorry, because we do intend to seek the funds from this Rural Communities Opportunity Grant. And what we'd like to do is to apply those funds, if we were to be awarded those funds, to a project that already exists, that's already been prioritized, that needs a little bit of funding help. So that project is the downtown dispersed parking. Chuck talked about that a little bit earlier. And I want to emphasize that I'm not going to go into downtown dispersed parking tonight. That's going to be discussed in a couple of weeks with council. Chuck will be coming in and giving you a presentation talking all about that, about the bids that were received and any strategies moving forward. Tonight, we're just talking about the grant predominantly. So this project is ready to go. So if we were awarded, we could move forward on this. We could spend that money. The bids have been received, and we already have a grant award of about $5.7 million from the state. The city is putting in $1 million from the general fund, and that's that local match or local funding or financial opportunity or contribution. And then there's still a remaining gap, or there's a gap that's over $1 million. And again, I'm not going into this today. I'm not trying to give a report on the bid. Chuck will be bringing that to you soon. But we can report tonight that based on the bid that came in and the funding that we already have identified, there is still a gap of over $1 million, between $1 and $1.5 million. So just regarding, I'm going to go back up to that for a second. Regarding the grant, I just wanted to reiterate the grant that was brought up, the opportunity that was brought to the council a few weeks ago, or I guess it was a few weeks ago. We are intending to apply for that grant. We are intending to apply for that grant for a project that already exists, that's already been prioritized, that does meet the criteria, or most of the criteria that I've identified that the state is looking at. And we feel like we'd be good candidates for that. So we have a need. There's a grant that exists. The need has already been identified and is prioritized. So we do intend to seek after those funds for this project. So there was another question about EDAB, and that's the Economic Development Advisory Board. And the mayor went over that really quick, and collaboration between EDAB and the city. Now, we already talked about this. The city staff is a non-voting member on that board. Before I served on it, Carly was on it. We do actively attend and we are actively engaged. I've spoken with people from EDAB several times over the past few weeks about this grant and some other matters as well. We do have a meeting tomorrow with EDAB. I plan to be there. In fact, one of the items on the agenda is to talk about this grant that we're looking at and whether or not the county would like to provide a letter of support or jump on that request and see if we can get a little bit more money. I do want to just state really quick that the total amount of this grant that's available is just over $10 million. And there's a lot of communities that are going to be going after this. And the likelihood that every community that applies is going to get the full grant amount is pretty low, because there's a lot of communities that need a lot of work done. So we're optimistic that we can put together a really good application. And we think that with the county's help, we would be great candidates for the $600,000. But after talking to them tomorrow and after talking to Carly, if we and our engineering department, if we feel like it would be appropriate and prudent to go after double that with the county, then we'll look at doing that. But just to point out the obvious, we could, if we did get awarded that, we'd be taking 10% of the total pot, which is quite a bit for one community to be granted. So I wanted to just do a little bragging about our engineering department and Chuck and Richard and the work that they've done over the last few years and the amount of funding and projects that we've been able to move forward because of the work that they've done. So right now, the current grant awards that have already been awarded that we are in progress in one phase or another on is 10. So we have 10 total projects that are partially funded through grants that are being worked on right now. The total award amount for all of those grants is over $19 million. So $19 million is coming from different agencies, mostly from the state, where we're getting money so that we can do projects that we don't necessarily have the money for, because our total match is $3.6 million, which means that we've multiplied those funds 524%. So we've been able to, I think as Chuck has pointed out, we're basically getting 80 cents on the dollar, or we're able to complete projects for 20 cents on the dollar of local money. This is fantastic. This is amazing. Our people have been doing a great job. We continue to look for grants. We have a very active grant department. Engineering department's always looking at grants. We're very much aware of these grants. And if we can identify a grant that lines up with a project that already has been prioritized, that the council has already moved forward, and we need funding for, you can guarantee that we will go after that grant if it's something that is logical and that we can possibly attain. So that is pretty much my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them if I can. Otherwise, you can look forward to a discussion about the downtown dispersed parking in a couple of weeks when Chuck will be coming back and talking to you. And I can give you updates as we're moving along as we do apply for this grant.
Questions? Luke?
I don't have too many questions. I really appreciate all this information. I think it's really fantastic, and keep hearing about all the grants that the city's applying for, but it's really amazing seeing the total amount kind of put together, particularly at what it cost us. But with that, I am aware that a lot of grants out there do allow like cash matches in the form of either like donating use of equipment or volunteer hours or anything like that. Is that something that the city has explored? Just thinking that we might be able to kind of coordinate like community volunteer days where it's a way to bring community together towards addressing a community issue while also kind of saving actual cash dollars to the state.
Right. So those are called in-kind donations, and generally those are work that our staff has done or plans that we've already put forward. And I assume we are using in-kind dollars where we can and where it's available. Not all grants allow for in-kind matches. Where they do, we always have expenses that we can put towards those.
Any other questions?
So part of my interest in this grant was, we had residents come. It was the first time I'd heard of it at our last meeting, September 12th, and talk to us about, a lot of needs downtown and interest in possibly collaborating. And so my understanding was there was discussion about this grant probably for weeks now about potential collaboration, but maybe initially the city wasn't interested. We weren't sure that we wanted to apply. So is that kind of why there hasn't been a more defined collaboration between the city and the county so far?
Well, I think we have been definitely collaborating with them. I think to the extent that we've talked about this grant at great length, the only thing we haven't done is applied for the grant with them so far. We are still in the process of collaboration. Originally, the grant request or the opportunity for the grant was brought to us for a different project. In fact, a new project that had yet to be defined as to the scope of that project.
What was that?
It was a downtown beautification project, and there was a desire to potentially do some planning and to potentially go into a new project. And after talking to Carly and to the mayor and our staff, I went back and said, you know, that sounds great. It's something I would love to work on. That's something that I truly love and care about, especially the potential for some pedestrian improvements in the downtown. But we are in the process of working on a lot of different projects, and all of those projects aren't funded yet. So if we could find a project that was already in progress, that already has been prioritized as part of the strategic plan of the city council, I think it would be more suitable that we use that money for that, as opposed to using the grant as a means to create another project.
So if we get the grant, the $1 million that Ben Billingsley had, found in the general fund to potentially use towards aesthetics for the dispersed parking, it would offset part of that money from the general fund.
No, I think all that money from the general fund would still
Yeah,
go
'cause
in
we,
there.
we still have a shortfall. So we are
Is that
looking for
as a result of the
$1
bids? Because
Yeah.
that wasn't the case before. And
Wasn't, yeah. So we're
the part I think,
in.
at least of my concern, I don't know about colleagues, but from the beginning has been the aesthetic portion, because we were told 6% of the funds for dispersed parking could go to aesthetics. And there was so much that we in the community wanted, so that we wouldn't just end up with asphalt. And so some of our earlier talks, when we discussed different forms, for example, of paving, we're like, oh, well, in some places you have stamped concrete, or I'm going to forget some of the phrasing, but you have some fancier stuff. And we were thinking, oh, okay, yeah, but that's more expensive and that may not end up being viable for us. And 6% is going to go very quickly if you want things like planting and lights, and we may not have enough. And I seem to recall, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, that's when Ben went and found that $1 million to help with the aesthetic portion. So I guess my concern is there a chance that we're still going to end up having a discussion that we couldn't do the aesthetics because we had to put this $1 million, and I know the 6% is set aside for aesthetics, but the $1 million somewhere else? Because I think when we had that discussion, a lot of us thought that's where it was going. And it seems like, especially, last week and talking to residents, they do want to see beautification, and they want to see shade, and they want to see, those things.
Yeah. So I don't want to go into the history of the project or take away Chuck's thunder when he gets to explain the whole project to you in a couple of weeks. And partly the reason I don't want to do that is because I wasn't involved in all that. I don't have the institutional knowledge, but I do know that a project was designed, that there was a final product, which is the product. Design drawings were done, and those design drawings were sent out for bids, and bids were done based on those drawings. The drawings are a complete package of everything that the city is going to be doing, and the aesthetics that were added, or the aesthetics are covered within that. There might have been design choices that were made throughout the process in order to satisfy whatever requirements were the staff was faced with and the city council was faced with at the time. But the project is completely designed. These funds that we're looking at for the grant is only to fund the existing project. It wouldn't change the project at all. It would only make it so, and it is a complete project. It would only make it so that we could get closer to bridging that gap that we have in funding.
And I guess, one other question then moving forward, and maybe a suggestion for those of you who are staying on and those of you who might get elected, is it does seem like one thing we've always struggled with over the years was maximizing collaboration and conversation with the county and with local businesses on some of this stuff. So maybe next year you guys invite economic development from the county and EDAB to come and do a presentation so you can understand what they do. And then maybe it's a good opportunity to also, we have different relationships where some of us sit as council members on boards with county commissioners. And, maybe this is an important thing that the county wants that fits enough in our vision for the community and the pillars that we've done, that you actually at some point do put a city council person and a county commissioner on those next stages. But I had asked for some circulation of the older plans we have, in part because I'd like the council that continues and the new council to have information about what we already spent money on and what we already did. Because I think for some of the residents and the businesses, it gets really tiring because you're just constantly doing planning and you feel like you've done this before. So I would really just urge you to take the downtown plan, take the parking master plan, take the things that we spent money on already, to make sure that if you in the end decide you have to do more planning, you aren't reinventing the wheel, but also that you do maybe have some initial conversations about those downtown improvements that our residents and businesses would like to see, because it could be in the end that when you sit back and look at it, you decide, maybe I do want to do that first because maybe it's cheaper and maybe it's faster and maybe it would get us there. And I'm not saying that's necessarily the case. It's just kind of some observations from sitting here and watching that history. But yes, thank you so much for all the grant work and the information. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No, I was just gonna say thank you. This was, cleared up a lot for me and some of the questions that I had. And I was gonna say, I kind of feel like, this whole thing got brought up through EDAB, and stuff. And it kind of seemed like EDAB was looking at changing things on Main Street without actually consulting with the city or so, a little bit. And so I think to Ronnie's kind of point, I think that, in the future, it'd be great if, you were there, and kind of speaking for the city and stuff, but maybe there is room for, a council person or someone from the commission, do that, so that we can kind of have more of a foot in, in the game, saying like, hey, we don't need this. And it sounds like what you did that, like, hey, we don't need this, we can't use this money on this because we're going to apply for it so that we can do our dispersed parking, and finish that project. So I think that maybe there's some miscommunication on what their goals were and our goals weren't lining up the way that they thought they should.
Well, for my part, I'll just make a plea for just more communication and more broad communication, because I really don't feel like anybody was being disingenuous. I feel like if nothing else, the conversation should have started sooner and it should have gone out to a broader pool.
Yeah, the communication just wasn't
Yeah.
there on here. So, but thank you so much for
Yeah,
for
you're
this
welcome.
presentation. That was exactly what I was looking for.
Okay, great. We'll work on those other things and
Great.
okay,
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you,
thank
Michael.
you.
All right, next on our agenda is the consent agenda. We have 3 items, items 6.1, 6.2, 6.3. First item is a ratification of a letter of support for the North Maverick EV state chargers. There's grant money, I think I told you guys about this, available for businesses to apply to install EV chargers, and North Maverick wanted to do that. And I encourage any other business that wants to, particularly gas stations that want to implement EV chargers, to request the letter of support. I'd be happy to do that. We have the approval of the minutes, September 12th, 2023, and approval of the bills against the city of Moab in the amount of $2,156,656.53. So I have a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Motion made by Kalen. I'll second by Tawny. Discussion, Kalen?
Nope.
Tawny?
No.
Anybody else?
I'll
Tawny?
just bring up, I know we have some residents who look at the packet, and sometimes, you look at our bill amounts, and this is kind of a high bill amount for us, 2.1 million. So just know I did ask and got the reminder that this explains a lot of it. 429,000 was that settlement with Ensign that was discussed at our September 12th meeting, and 1.147 million is the total of our long-term debt repayments. But I know it can be shocking. So maybe that helps.
Yep. Thanks, Ronnie. All in favor of the consent agenda?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Next up, we have general business, and that's Carly. Consider a general business 7.1, consideration of adoption of a resolution 14-2023, adopting the city of Moab fiscal year 23-24 strategic plan. This is something that we were hoping to present to you in July, when the the year started. But with Ben's departure, it got a little bit delayed, so apologize for that, but better late than never. And it's gonna be improved as time goes on. as
Yeah,
well.
we want to upload it into ClearGov. It just takes a little bit more time. The original draft of it that Ben and I were working on went missing when his account was deleted. So we just have to rebuild it, and it will help with some project tracking too. That's something great about ClearGov is it helps. It's sort of this dynamic interface that will update as projects move forward, so the public will be able to see progress on it, and it's a way for department directors to track their progress. And that's all I have. I don't have a bigger,
Does anybody have any questions?
I think
I
we went
mean,
over it in detail before we finalized the budget in a spreadsheet form.
Yeah, I guess I had a question because I look back, I had to remind myself, I mean, I know we discussed this in May. Ben had sent us an Excel sheet version. And then I sat and kind of looked through them sheet by sheet, and I definitely have some questions. I didn't know if the intention was we were going to spend some time discussing it, or I don't know if other people have questions.
I do.
And we also, some were carried over, not from, some of the items were carried over from last year's strategic plan that are kind of ongoing and not necessarily identified in the strategic planning effort during January.
Ronnie, go ahead.
I'll let Kaylin go first because
Um,
I have to flip a page.
So I'll just start that, the spreadsheet had a column for accountability, which it helped my understanding of the actual items, because with that removed, like it's.
You mean the
it's-
departments
the
that were,
departments,
yeah, okay.
And then there's I mean, just going through, under the first pillar for zoning opportunities for diversified businesses, and it says, talks about the small area plans. And it seems like we started a small area plan effort pre-pandemic, and then that wasn't really finished. And so is this talking about sort of finishing that work, or was that so long ago that we just kind of have to start over?
You know, I don't know about the work pre-pandemic. Maybe that was before my time. I think we were talking about the opportunity we had in mind were things like a Mill Creek corridor, small area plan, for example, for those little that neighborhood district.
Yeah.
So it was on the lines of those. I don't, if that is carrying on from a previous effort, then yes, we would want to pick that up, but I don't know.
Yeah, maybe we can, are you okay if we do it pillar by pillar? And then if I have
Yeah.
questions on that pillar,
Okay,
yeah, sorry,
so
go
I'll
ahead. Ben.
finish and
Yeah.
then you can jump in.
Yeah.
Consider small business incubator. I don't remember this being a tool that we discussed, and since we don't really have much of an economic development department and there's other economic development entities, I'm just wondering if that's really a place for the city to put effort.
I do
As
believe we
opposed to-
voted on that
Oh,
during the straw polling that was happening. That was, I think it was generated as an idea by staff, and then it was incorporated in our discussion, and I do think it was included. It can be removed.
Oh.
This is your policy document.
okay. I guess I'm just having a brain, I'm having amnesia.
Right. I do think there's opportunities. When my recollection of this discussion was talking about how we can, this is like an opportunity to collaborate with the county because they kind of have similar efforts in mind. So it was not necessarily us starting one up, but somehow consider how we can contribute to that effort.
Okay. Okay, that's what I have on pillar one.
So just going back to small area plans, yeah, the history you want to look up, I think the consultant was Landmark. And yeah, so if you have trouble finding that, I scaled through my email, but I think because I don't know that that was ever finished. I can't remember if the consultant at some point was asked to pivot to something else. But just like with the downtown plan, just a request to find that first. To inform history and decision. And then let's see, that might be all I have for that one. I don't know if Jason or Luke or Tony has anything.
I don't, on that one.
Okay, on the second pillar, is that okay, Ronnie? Under equity inclusion, the removal of the department made this, some of these items a little mysterious, I thought, for like if someone was coming into this blind.
Right, it will be included like for, I think the purpose of us tracking the departments was internal tracking for me and for the COO to make sure the departments who need to know about those components are informed about it and they're being tracked. It was just more just as organizing.
Okay. So this seems like a pretty high level document, and in the interest of transparency to the community, having it be understandable seems, I mean, maybe only 3 people will look at it and I shouldn't worry about it, but
No, I mean, do you remember like the level of information in the current strategic plan? Where we kind of have progress, there's questions about whether it's on track, there's a disruption or minor disruption. I think that's the kind of reporting that will be happening. Whether engineering should be doing it or not isn't necessarily, I don't know if that will be reflected in the ClearGov plan.
okay. All right. I don't have anything else on pillar 2. Oh, except fractional ownership concerns, that's under, it seems like there's a bunch of housing related things under another pillar.
There's a workforce housing pillar.
Right, and it seems like fractional ownership tied.
We take
It's-
that off since we kind of got shut down.
Well,
But,
yes,
but the action item talks about working with the legislature to propose
right, yeah.
statutory alternatives.
Right, and we did have the I think we continue to try to do that.
Just leave it on there.
Yeah, leave it on there. And we got it completed. So we had in January, we identified this as a priority. We met with Senator McHale between now and then and kind of got an answer. I say we keep it on as a concern of ours of some kind.
Fair enough.
Just don't want to lose it.
Anybody else on pillar 2?
Yeah. This item, I just wanted an explanation because I couldn't remember what it was. Under the management of the Center Street parking at the library, it says Wi-Fi shut down after hours, PW protect time limit.
I think that was Public Works. Like, I don't know what that even is. Levi might know in Ben's discussion with him. Some sort of Public Works. Oh, password protection. That's what it is. Yeah.
Okay, so probably had to do with the
Yeah.
idea being if the Wi-Fi is available 24/7, you're more likely
Yeah,
to
that's
get overnight camping.
Those are just like ideas. We don't have really an answer for that problem. So it was brainstorming.
Okay, and then under the youth engagement and recreation investment, the identify project to use RAP funding, PRT.
Parks, Rec and Trails.
Okay, and my recollection from looking back was that there's still the parks plan was probably going to identify a project for that, but one possible was shoot, I'm making a note. No, I can't find it. I think Swanee maybe. Okay.
A playground. at
The
Swanee.
playground.
Mhm.
Okay, but that's still okay in the works. I think that was it for me on that one.
Pillar 3.
I don't have anything until pillar 6.
Ronnie, anybody else?
Just look.
3, 4, and 5.
Oh, just a question on the franchise agreement providers, the inventory and review of all franchise agreements.
Yes.
I noticed some things on the list, because we did this a while ago in January, they're already complete, but I couldn't remember, are we done with that one or is that one
No,
still?
we're gonna
okay.
still get started on that one.
Okay.
The one that's most immediate will be the solid waste district. Oh, we have completed a franchise review? Yeah, sure.
Yes, we did it as part of our looking at the Cane Creek Boulevard project
Mhm.
because there's relocations. But yeah, we've gone completely through. Richard and I have gone through it. And
Oh, great.
We just haven't had a chance to get it to you,
Okay.
but it's done. So we'll get that to you and be able to report it.
That one. And then solid waste is coming up too.
Okay, yeah, remind me, when does that one run out? Is it 2024?
Yeah, March, I
Okay.
believe. Is it March?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. That's it for me for 3.
Anything on 4?
The developing of the education and outreach plan in conjunction with the recycling coordinator under waste generation management, is that, should I view that as what Jessica Thacker does now, or is that something separate? I guess I'm turning to Kalen because he's our waste and recycling guru.
I suspect that will be rehashed when the
Mhm.
arrangement with the district is negotiated.
Okay, cool. And then I figure this is probably just under 8, that's just a starting list, right? Schedule annual meetings with, and then there's some agencies listed, BLM and Forest Service, but I assume.
Examples.
Yeah, okay, so not meant to be inclusive, I mean, or.
Park Service, of
complete.
course, another, yeah.
Okay, that's it for me on that one.
6.
In case it might, these are kind of phrases, so they probably weren't meant to be totally detailed, but I just wanted to make sure that deed restricted property inventory, I take it that'll be not just a list and map, but it will also probably be accounting for when those restrictions expire.
Oh, interesting. We can look into.
No, that
doing
just,
easy
yeah, I'm
for us
thinking.
on our ends,
I'm
yeah.
thinking that's important because from when I used to go to the housing task force meetings, it just seemed like, we kind of look out to the cliff of like, okay,
Mhm.
you might have some coverage here, but that's all going to disappear at X point. So I guess just a request that
That's
that
good
get
feedback.
included. And I see that Living Wage Solutions is here, which, I think is great and everybody would ideally want that, but I can't remember within the state of Utah, is that actually something that we can explore?
It's not
Yeah.
something we can mandate. We
Yeah.
can't set a minimum wage. This was a robust discussion at strategic planning as well. And I think that we had in mind that as the community development director kind of got settled in, we would explore we're not going to achieve living wage solutions this year, right? This is just a way that we can have conversations with business owners, try to understand if there are programs or opportunities for us to be partners in something like this, if the county was undergoing anything. And I remember during strategic planning, we were like, we just want some sort of level of effort here. Let's see what we can come up with in year 1. And recognizing it was a year 1, it was going to look like a year 1 result.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder. Good.
So what I was thinking that was it could be a metric we throw the term diversification around, but it could be a metric for success beyond just like, because we can have more diverse businesses and still have like the same lack of living wages. But if we have that as a specific metric, then we can target for that and judge success. One thing that I wondered about it that wasn't mentioned was adoption of the updated housing plan, which I and staff are working on. And I don't know if we just forgot to mention it in strategic planning or.
I don't remember it coming up in strategic planning. We intend to do that. This document, the resolution makes clear this is not a binding document.
Yes.
Other things are going to be kind of coming our way. But it is appropriate. That would be an effort. It's going to require a level of effort from staff and council to vet it, and it will help with housing solutions.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I'll add one thing on the wage thing, just like think it was something Luke maybe brought up at one point, but I guess maybe when you guys do have that conversation, I thought one really good point he made one day was, sometimes you have a request, in the ideal world, if it was at all possible to provide housing at a very, very low rent level. But one of the things we have to consider is even if we could do that, are we artificially then supporting maybe an employer who is paying just way too low of a wage? So anyway, I always thought that was a good point that sat with me to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's like we're bearing an externality is being imposed on the public, right? Or a public institution. And is that fair? Is that what we should be doing?
It's kind of a subsidy in that respect to help that one employer. Maybe when the 10 employees they're competing with are paying more or whatever. Okay, that was it for that.
I don't have anything else on the strategic plan. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just scrolling down to 6.
I think that's the biggest.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, so it's the consistent under noise management, consistent, oh, never mind, I just figured that out. Never mind. I was glad to see the transition from complaint-based enforcement to proactive, made it on there because it seems like we've been discussing that again recently. I guess the one just closing thought I had when I looked back on this and I saw the consider strategies to improve neighbor-to-neighbor communication. I guess as I reflected that, I think it says organize and implement in-person community events. I think that can be great, but I guess as some of our candidates who are running for office, and we've had these conversations, several people at this table have probably brought this up, that, you know, we've always been taught that if you focus on creating a great community, that people will want to come and stay. And so in some respect, I guess when I look back at that one, I was like, I'm not sure this one is so much our job. I feel like our focus is more to be fair and try to work with people and listen to them about what they need. But maybe the neighbor to neighbor thing is more ideally something that happens when we're, you know, providing other good things. But I can't remember frankly what we had in mind when we wrote that.
That my recollection was
Yeah.
the idea of if there's a way for the city to facilitate things like neighborhood block parties or like, you know, gathering split spaces, third places for the community. And if we could provide those places, that would be what we're kind of aiming for. But I think you're right too, that running a city well, just in a community really well, just fosters interaction amongst neighbors.
Yeah, I feel like over the years, some of the things that we would do when we would have a meeting, say on way back when we had meetings on noise and traffic, and we did do one on one side of town, just because we knew the issues on that side of town were different than the other side of town. I know sometimes when the city has dealt with individual planning in certain neighborhoods, you know, that has been helpful to hold a meeting in that neighborhood. So I guess I relate more to that than, I kind of feel like individual neighbors either talk to each other all the time, or they never talk to each other, or they decide, on their block, they're going to have a party. I know. That's it.
Any questions on the projects? All right, now, you guys, well, I think we're gonna implement this into the software.
Yes.
I'm not sure if council members going off, the council are gonna have an opportunity to see that before you go, but definitely in January, we will review all of this in a more kind of formal format that includes departments, that you can see the progress that's being made. I kind of directed Carly to get this on your agenda because we only have a few more months out of the year, and it was important for you guys to at least see what you talked about and what our goals were, and then approve this resolution so that, you know, it's all solidified. And then in January, we'll have be able to go into a deeper dive with the new council.
I did find one note on projects, and that was just, again, this isn't meant to be comprehensive, but just kind of a big one that seems like we've been talking about it on our minds. Maybe it's here, but maybe I overlooked it, but it's the whole idea of the stormwater and flood management. Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
that should be in, for example, there's NRCS stream
Okay.
bank stabilization projects for one thing. Those are grant funded programs that we have to provide a match for.
Yeah,
and
I
so
can't.
that should be captured kind of.
Okay,
there,
I
that-
can remember if you had in mind, if you and Chuck had in mind that we would actually have, like, I don't know if it was a separate master plan, but really kind of more of a larger plan to help us
Yeah, we did talk-
anticipate what will happen with flooding and also have a plan. Yeah. And sorry, sometimes I forget the wording for our various plans and
So-
projects.
We're in discussion with FEMA right now. They have about potentially doing they call it a watershed restoration plan, but really what it is a stormwater master plan,
Okay.
flooding plan for the Mill Creek and Pack Creek corridors. it's very early discussions. They think the program may fit. I'm not sure yet. It takes it beyond just a list of projects, which I think is a good thing. So yeah, that we are working on that, but it's in progress.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
another one of
no,
those
just
grant
seemed
opportunities.
important. So I just wanted to make sure it was,
Yeah.
yeah.
We're not calling
encapsulated.
it a grant yet because we haven't applied, but we're talking to them about it.
Okay, yeah, maybe that just helps the new people. Yeah, okay.
Motion.
I move to adopt resolution 14-2023, adopting a City of Moab fiscal year 2023 to 2024 strategic plan.
A second.
All right, motion made by Kalen, seconded by Luke. Any discussion, Kalen?
Thanks to staff for making this happen and to you for getting it on the agenda and moving it forward. I anticipate seeing it in the ClearGov.
Great, thanks. Luke?
Nope.
Anybody else? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Yay, it's good to get that.
Yeah.
done. All right, next up is Lisa to discuss with you the consideration of a contract award to David Evans and Associates for on-call community engagement services.
Good evening, everybody. So I'm here asking the council tonight to approve the on-call engagement contract, and that is one of the things in the strategic plan, so I'm excited about it. And just in some background, and I believe this is in your packet, but I want to make clear. So this firm will assist my office, which is me, as needed in planning and conducting public outreach, education efforts, and dissemination of information for large-scale city projects. And particularly, I'm thinking of infrastructure projects that we have coming up because we have some sizable ones that, in my opinion, will require a lot of boots on the ground action at different points throughout the downtown dispersed parking. We're going to have 9 sections of streets that we're going to need to stay in touch with the people on those streets as the work is coming to them and then progressing. For instance, I mean, but there are other projects like that. So this firm, this contract will be for me to work collaboratively with the firm on these larger projects as it's decided. The cost for the services will be built into the overall project cost, not the contractor who gets the contract to do the project, but the overall project. So, we'll be paying it, but it'll be paid out of that project, not out of like a special fund or something in the city.
Questions for Lisa?
Make a motion.
Motion.
I move to approve awarding the on-call community engagement services contract to David Evans and Associates Incorporated and authorize the mayor to sign the consulting services agreement.
Second.
I'll second it.
Motion made by Tani, seconded by Jason. Any discussion, Tani?
Nope.
Jason?
No, I was just gonna say that, I think that this is a good thing, that we saw this when we've had a few construction projects, that there was a lot of people who didn't know what was going on. And that's why we kind of built this into it and wanted to have it, was because we needed a way because of the frustrations of the residents with not knowing what was going on and wanted to take it into our own hands. and stuff.
Yeah,
So,
that's exactly right.
Yeah, so,
So
I just want to make sure everybody kind of realizes that we're not just doing this to do it, but is to keep people better.
Right, and one person has a really difficult time doing all of that.
all of
That's
it,
a lot of
right?
it.
So
Yeah.
I think this will help with community engagement.
Yes,
tremendously.
and we'll develop plans, together. The firm and I will develop plans, whoever they assign to the projects that we do. And I can update the council on those as we're moving along.
Great. Any other discussion? Go ahead.
Just, yeah, kind of echoing what everybody said, but I'd also be interested to see is like, as this process kind of progresses, to see if there are any things that we can glean from the consultants that we might be able to kind of incorporate in-house. If it's not like a big ask, you already have a ton on your plate as is. And so if there are things that we can kind of incorporate that might actually make things easier.
Yeah, I'm always up for learning,
yeah.
so that's great.
Thanks, Luke. Anybody else? Motion by Tani, second by Jason. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Next up is item 7.3, consideration of a contract award to Jackson Excavation for spring number 2 collection box improvement project. Somebody want to make a motion, or do you want to hear from Chuck first?
I move to award the spring number 2 collection box improvement project construction contract to Jackson Excavation Inc. in the amount of $179,045 and authorize the mayor to sign the notice of intent to award and contract.
I'll second.
All right, motion by Kalen, seconded by Ronnie. This is a roll call vote. Jason?
Oh,
Aye.
can we ask a question?
Oh, sure.
And that was just Chuck. So I appreciate that, it was discovered that, we had damage, plug leaking. I was just curious, when we all think about budgeting for a long-term replacement, is this typically something, that ages out and needs replacement? And that's probably what happened here, or was this an unusual failure or something?
Oh, this was not regularly scheduled maintenance. This outlived its useful life, that element of it. But where we have been thinking about it is part of the water bond that we passed, council passed back in 2019, I think. We had in there some money set aside for optimization. And so we did a study, we had a consultant evaluate every one of our water facilities, distribution and source facilities, and what would be required to bring them up to state standards. So we have that, and bringing this spring up to standard was one of those projects. And we have enough money in that portion of the bond to pay for these projects. So it wasn't going to be first up. It wasn't our highest priority, but since it happened, we were able to address it.
How long should I expect a collection box to last?
The new one's going to last longer than the old one, 50 to 60 years.
Okay, no, that helps. Okay, that was it.
All right. Motion by Kalen, second by Ronnie. Jason, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ronnie?
Aye.
Luke?
Aye.
Kalen?
Aye.
Tawny?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Next up is item 7.4, consideration of approval to grant an easement to Rocky Mountain Power to supply power to well number 12.
I'll move to grant easement to Rocky Mountain Power for the purpose of supplying power to well number 12 as described in the attached easement documentation, and authorize the mayor to sign the easement.
Motion by Tawny, second by Luke. Any discussion, Tawny?
I know there, we have to do that.
Anybody else? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck. All right, last item on our general business is item 7.5, consideration of adoption of ordinance 2023-13, an ordinance amending the Moab Municipal Code, section 17.36.020, permitted uses and regulations in the industrial I-1 zoning district to relax the zoning requirements for self-storage warehouse developments and add permitted use for kennels and indoor and outdoor. Corey?
Thank you. If the council wants, we can engage in the presentation. It's fairly short, or we can move right to discussion, answering questions, whatever.
What would you
You'd
guys
like
like? I will mention that the plan commission reviewed this. They held a public hearing. They've made their recommendations. Would you guys like Corey to give you some more detail, or would you like to move into discussion?
How short is it?
Well, as short as you'd like it to be. What we could do is just basically go over an overview of where these industrial zones are located with its specificity of the properties, what it is that we're looking at as far as the changes specific to the use parameter of self-storage, and then of course that additional component, which is the kennels option. So, and that's about as a brief summary as I can without extra materials, but yeah, we
Right.
can dive in.
So one thing to consider too is that in an industrial zone, by adding a new use, it pertains to all the zones. It's not just this one
Not
piece of
just the
property.
one.
And so I believe that's part of the reason that it's not being recommended by the planning commission.
No, yeah. I mean, I read all that stuff that you just talked about in the packets.
I did too.
Right.
Yeah.
I did too.
All right. Questions for Corey? Ronnie?
I guess I have one or two, Corey. You read this and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, it seems like we're being stricter on this particular use than the other one. So that seems fair to change it. But, as someone who's not an expert in this, I guess I always wonder, do we know why that use, had some stricter parameters.
Right.
Yeah.
That's very interesting to go back through our code. And one of the things we do have within our code structure right now is the many years of developing aspects of those code, or what kind of go in 10-year increments, or even sometimes some breakdowns of that. There'll maybe be a lot of code development in 98, and then in 2002, and then a bit more in 08, and so on. And with that, you can see really whatever may have been a pressing issue at the time, there's this consistent language within these sections. So you can almost read the code and say, this was probably a 2015 development, the way they approach that. So this corresponds with this, it's mirrored exactly within the C4 zone. So it's very likely that there was
Okay.
maybe a potential development at the time
Okay.
in multiple zones. So they just approached this use saying, well, this is how we want to approach it at this time. And within staff right now, there's no continuation of why that might have been a necessary application, especially in the industrial zone. Maybe in the C4 zone, where this is a mirrored use, may have made more sense with some of those particular aspects. But again, within the industrial zone, many of the parcels they wouldn't work at all. So when we looked at this in general code, we were basically bringing this use back into viability within what the zone context was. So aspects of height, similar buffering requirements, so that it was more compliant with other use parameters in there, not limiting the use parameters altogether, just more compliant. And that's, again, this is being generated and the application submitted by applicants themselves, but that was as they were developing that staff's contribution. That makes sense to approach these particular amendments in that way. But yeah, no
Yeah.
specific like,
Yeah.
is this property at this time? We don't
Yeah.
have a specific reference
Yeah.
there.
No, and because there was a suggested staff change to not do the kennel part and address, that question about adding kennels through the code changes that are happening. I understand that if we approve it that way, the document in our packet will have some things out of it. The one thing that confused me slightly from reading it in different places was, I feel like in some places I read, I can't remember if it was height specific, but this would be the case if adjacent to a residence.
Right.
And other places it would be, it didn't look like that was there. So I started to get myself confused.
And that's easy.
Yeah.
I'm glad you've actually
Yeah.
brought it up, because again, as this is a
Yeah.
citizen's application,
Yeah.
we're carrying their application
Yeah.
consistent all the way through the process. But then with that, you're also getting the staff recommendation, which has slightly different language, and then the planning commission's recommendation, which had slightly different. So you're
Yeah.
actually dealing with one code text with three possible different avenues.
Yeah. So
After planning commission, we did consolidate a number of those. So what is currently proposed, height's a perfect example.
yeah.
There was some original discussion about doing, well, just from the staff perspective, bringing it to a 40-foot height limit, just consistent with all other zones. Uses don't really matter, because at that point, buildings are buildings at the height that they're going to be. But then during the planning commission discussion, that shifted to maybe a little bit more of a slightly mitigated approach to that 30 feet, which at that point staff said, well, if this is how planning commission wants to go, we'll actually amend our recommendation to coincide with planning commissions. And then the applicants as well said, I think we're willing to also accept that. So that's where all three of the recommendations
Okay.
collided.
So,
But originally there would be materials, especially if you're looking at the planning commission packet, a lot of different language on kind of the same
yeah.
topic.
Okay. So for that one, I should think, if I go with your recommendations, I'm sticking with the 30 feet. And
30
then in the
feet for this
case of, I
use.
think there was another place where there was an exception, maybe if next to a residential, and I can't remember if it was a buffering issue or a setback issue. Do you remember offhand which one it was?
There were a couple aspects of that. One was setback and one was height as well.
Yeah,
So
okay.
properties for this use adjacent to a residential zone would maintain that 20-foot height limit. But what, from a staff perspective, we actually looked at is that's almost kind of kicking the can of the same issue, as many of these properties are adjacent to residential zones. So we're exactly back in the same boat we started with. So the 30 actually made more sense if we weren't just going to do a blanket
Yeah.
zoning height, which was the original staff recommendation. So I think staff could get on board with a blanket 40, or the 30 makes sense. We don't see it making sense to hold it down to a 20, even in a distance or a ratio perspective.
Okay.
And then the other was a setback, same thing. Reduced setbacks to a little bit more consistent within the other uses if it's adjacent to another industrial property line. So this isn't about zoning. This is just if you have an industrial property next to an industrial property, they'll share the same reduced setbacks, but if they're adjacent to a residential property on the other end, those are advanced
Okay, I
setbacks. And
think I
that also
read it
makes-
2 different ways, so I. just
Yeah,
wanted to
again,
make sure.
everybody
Okay.
from planning commission to the applicants, to planning commission, all were able to reconcile. That makes sense. That's appropriate.
Okay, I'll let someone else.
So I can add like one more point of clarification to the 30-foot thing. If I remember correctly, planning commission was actually giving some credence to the pre-existing language, saying that there might have been a valid reason for limiting the height. And so that's partly why they moved it up to 30 and not 40, is like there might be some reason to limit the height of it,
Mhm.
but also wanted to actually make it a feasible use within the zone.
Right.
And then my one question was in terms of like the property boundaries, where like how are we defining next to a residential property? Is it based on zone? Because like it looks like in the industrial zone where this property is located, there are a couple of other existing properties that look like private residences. that
Right,
are-
so existing uses versus zoning.
Yeah.
If I'm reading your
Yeah.
question right. So yeah, within the industrial zone in this location in general, and the applicant actually attested to this, that they were historically in this place and there was kind of a mix of uses down here, but this zoning was applied over the top of many existing uses, most of them residences, which became legal non-conforming at that time. So this boundary will not link to a legal non-conforming use of a property. It's the zoning of that property. In that uses change all the time. So it'd make more sense to design that around what is more constant, which will be the zone
Mhm.
versus potential alternating uses.
Right. But with that in mind, we potentially do run the risk of now, if somebody were to develop next to one of these legal non-conforming uses or like form or residences, that they would be able to build out basically to the boundary line.
To what would be 5 feet,
5
and that
feet,
which is a consistent from the building code perspective because of fire separations. The reason we have 7 is to allow for even encroachments into that setback area that don't initiate fire separation. So when we all talk about where the wall of the structure is, which is how we measure setbacks, most structures are going to have an eave or some sort of cornice sill. And with that, it has to overhang by a certain amount, typically anywhere from 16 to 2 feet. And so that 2 foot keeps you from getting into fire where you're actually having to fire rate that new use. So anyway, long story short, that's how we get 7 typically, but 5, if you're just doing a standard structural wall, makes sense. So we defaulted to that, but not a 0 line.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
How does this benefit the city in any way?
I think within the self-storage adjustments, it brings essentially, and we've talked about performative code before. I wouldn't say this is quite performative code, but I think it was code language in the form of use parameter that was designed in a non-functional way, at least for this zone. Again, like I said, for the C4 zone, some of these things may have made more sense with some of the larger properties that were out there. Their proximities to other mixed uses and adjacent uses, but in the industrial zone, the benefit I'm seeing is just purely on, I think, a planning perspective of this is increasing the viability of uses there that are already existing in the code. So if we didn't have this permitted use, which is kind of, again, with kennels, not that we're saying this is a poor use in that zone, it's that we're about to engage in a municipal rewrite where we will be engaging with the community, both bodies, to say, what do we reanalyze our zoning districts and then the uses within them. But yeah, so for us, this is cleaning up existing code that is deficient. That's what the benefit is of the self-storage. And again, with kennel, why we're excluding that is there is no benefit to staff at this point as far as function of code. It's purely a community driven. Is this what the council wants to see? in this
I'm not
place?
certain it's community driven. I think it's owner driven. And I'm not going to be supporting this, and I would, in full disclosure, a lot of these properties are in my neighborhood. My neighbors do not support it. I don't think the rationale is reasonable or logical. There are already storage facilities down there. What you store in them doesn't really matter. And I think citing what could possibly be there is a scare tactic. It's not likely that a coal plant or a gas plant will be put down there. None of those properties are big enough. If we were ever approached, an environmental feasibility study that close to the river and the wetlands wouldn't make those viable. So, I'm just not going to support it, but I'm just one vote. Luke.
Yeah, the one thing that I would like say to that is that we are on the cusp of building a lot of new units in Moab, many of which are going to be smaller, kind of like the Murphy Flats units. We know that Moabites love their toys, and our toys like change from season to season. I know that when I needed to get a storage unit with my partner, like we had to search all around town, and it took us a while to be able to find an open one because they're all pretty much used up. And so the current supply of storage units isn't necessarily meeting the need of our community. And so being able to make this use, which is already allowed within the industrial zone, actually viable, I think better prepares our community to be able to meet some of the needs that are going to arise of this growth in number of housing units. I also think it can potentially be a very useful resource for people who are living out of vehicles or anything like that, where they can have a storage unit that isn't going to cost them as much as like renting an apartment, while also being able to kind of store their seasonally based like gear and all that stuff. So yeah, I agree with not adding a brand new use into the zone like the kennels, but I think this has been an allowable use that hasn't really been made viable as far as I understand, because of some of these restrictions that were put in place that weren't necessarily just limited to height, but also just like how much of the property was allowed to be covered. Isn't that a part of it?
That was one of those.
Yeah, and so there's a
additional
lot of
limits.
factors in it that really limited the amount of units that could be placed within a property. And to a certain degree in an industrial zone, I think you'd want to maximize the amount of like area that's used there, so that you're really maximizing the impact that like that piece of property has for the community. But
Yeah, I think to Tani's point, I think because we did get some citizen feedback, fortunately for the planning commission and the public hearing. What we found, just in a very kind of plain analysis of this, is that most of the commentary surrounding this was not so much about a permitted use within the appropriate zone. It was the zoning's location, for lack of a better term. Its proximity to adjacent areas, both residential and open as far as the wetlands and nature areas. So again, a lot of the commentary we're seeing from, again, a planning perspective, when I'm doing an analysis of the property and based on the purpose and characteristics of the zone, that's what we're doing our staff analysis on. So when we bring it to the body, by all means, I want that to be acknowledged as this, here's the analysis, but that's the purpose, I think, of these bodies, to have that bigger picture discussion. So I think has been a continued and pretty apparent point through this process. But then, like you're saying, Luke, when we analyze the specifics of it, that's where we're at. So yeah, certainly a challenging discussion, simply because of where this zone is housed, not that the zone itself is the problem, it's where the zone's being placed.
yeah, no, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. And to me, like, I feel as though storage units relative to the other uses that are available that are actually feasible. I agree. I don't think we're going to be building a coal or an oil like refinery or anything like that in town, but there are other uses out there that could potentially be even more disruptive too. That like surrounding residential areas, like the wetland preserve and everything like that. And so to a certain degree, by actually making this use much more viable, like we are incentivizing people to go towards a use that's allowable in that area that ideally will have smaller impacts than some of the other uses that are actually allowable there as well. I think that was one of the things that had been discussed by the planning commission when they were kind of talking through this.
That's right. And yeah, during the planning commission meeting, through the applicants, we'll kind of call their contributions to that discussion, explained that they were just coming into this process open. And this is what came back to them, just trying to move the property. If they could continue it as housing, that's what they were wanting to do. But that wasn't viable through the zoning. Again, the location of the zoning, also a curiosity, but so they're just trying to do the best they can. So this is, again, a applicant approach. Staff's been trying to evaluate this in a very a clean way that makes the most sense for at least with one aspect that we're approaching this rewrite, but also what we have within the existing code to make it function from that premise. So yeah, again, it's toward your discussion where you want to take that next step.
So can I ask a question?
Of course.
And then we'll move on. So you're saying that they were interested in housing as a possible use?
I don't want to speak for them directly. I believe that's what they said during their presentation.
Yeah, I'm aware of it.
I think if I can recall, I believe there was a decision made to move out of the property, and when they were looking to sell the property, they found out that it was zoned industrial and that it couldn't be sold as a residential property. And obviously because of how
Right, legal non-conforming,
Yeah.
but coming with that,
Yeah.
the inability to really
yeah
redevelop or improve that property.
Yeah, and because of the allowable use, and I believe in attempts to sell it, like the people that have approached them have looked at it with the interest in potentially developing a storage unit, a storage facility out there, but that the zoning there potentially made it like infeasible.
Correct.
And so it potentially prevented them from actually being able to sell the land, period, and be able to move away from living next door to the water reclamation facility.
Okay, but what I'm wondering is, I mean, we have zones that allow housing, we have zones that allow storage units, and you can do also apply for a zone change without doing a wholesale change to the zoning code, doing a zoning map amendment.
Yes, so that was brought up, and I think, at least from the staff's perspective, seeing, I guess, the deficiencies in the industrial zone, and rather than creating an enclave of whatever would be an isolated zone, so not spot zoning per se, but an isolated zone that is more viable, or RA1, which again, it wouldn't meet an RA1 zoning parameter given the lot dimensions that it is. You'd have to go for what would be an up zone essentially just to meet the lot requirements. So when they came through staff, that wasn't really discussed heavily, but didn't seem as viable as fixing what is clearly seeming to be a dysfunctional use parameter. So that was, again, open discussion that we maybe briefed on slightly, but it really wasn't the recommendation at staff at that time, seeing it was the less likely of the successful outcomes.
But they can already do a self-storage there. We're just giving them extra height, right?
No,
Is it-
the
Am I reading
param,
Here is it, am I reading the wrong?
the parameters that go along with so it's a permitted use, yes, but then all the parameters that go along with that has to be a minimum of 3 acres and up to 5 acres, of which there are only, I believe, 3 properties in all of the industrial zone spots that would comply with that. And then there are, again, additional parameters, not just even with size, but additional parameters that would limit that pretty significantly, at least in the industrial zoning context.
Yeah, I think kind of like the percentage of the property that is allowed to actually have structures like developed on it, limited, like how many
Right,
like storage
50%
units you could
lot
actually put on
coverage.
there. And so it potentially, like from a financial feasibility perspective, like with the cost of purchasing the land and developing it, probably didn't make sense for anybody that was looking into it.
Right.
Motion.
All right. I move that the city council approve ordinance number 2023-13 to amend the text in the I1 industrial zone district section 17.36.020.8.24 for self-storage warehouses as proposed, with the exception of changing the height limits in subsection K from 20 feet to 30 feet, and modify the proposed ordinance to exclude adding indoor/outdoor kennels as a permitted use.
Second.
I'll second.
All right, motion by Luke, second by Jason. Any more discussion? I'll call for the vote.
I'd just like to say that I support the exclusion of outdoor kennels. I seems like that could potentially create a serious noise imposition on the neighborhood. I've lived in the South Spanish Valley where there were significant numbers of dogs kept outdoors and it was really annoying. I doubt there's any zone in the city. The city general plan does reference coordinating development of zoning with the county. We don't have to consider uses in isolation as the only place that property owners can, or the only place that uses can happen is in the city, because we have the whole valley and there are, as well as the county, and there are opportunities to accommodate uses with significant offsite impacts in places where just the lower density might accommodate that. So just wanted to, since we are excluding something was part of the application, I just wanted to have that on the record.
There are 18 houses on my street and there are 19 dogs. And they all bark at any given time.
All right, we have a motion made by Luke, seconded by Jason. All those in favor?
Aye.
No.
Opposed? All right, I'm gonna do a roll call. Jason?
Aye.
Ronnie?
Aye.
Luke?
Aye.
Kaylin?
Aye.
Ronnie?
Except from Tawny.
Tommy, sorry.
No.
All right, motion passes 4-1. All right, thank you. That's the end of our general business. And now we will move on to city manager updates and mayor council reports. I never like to do this, but I am going to this time because we do have an executive session and it's already 8:30. So if we can try to limit our reports to 3 to 5 minutes, that would be great. But if you have something really important you want to share, I'll be open to keeping it, but let's just try to move right into our executive session as soon as we can.
Hey,
All right.
great. Good evening. I just want to give you a reminder, the council and the community, that the Sustainability Action Plan survey is still online. It will be online until September 30th. So if you haven't participated, please do. It can be found on our Engage Moab website. Another planning update, the Parks Master Plan is underway. It will be going to the Planning Commission in draft form. The Planning Commission will take a look. And we've planned at least 2 council meetings for it. So an introduction on what was recommended by the community and the Planning Commission in a workshop, and then hopefully adoption the first meeting in December. There is a planned water outage tomorrow. I believe Conrad sent an email that everyone should have gotten. Planned water outage 300 South between 100 East and 400 East tomorrow, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. They're replacing a fire hydrant. All of the residents who are going to be affected have either we've had contact with them or they got a door hanger, so they should know about it. A reminder that we'll be having a flu clinic here for council members on October 13th. You can just stop by and get a flu shot. If there are COVID vaccines available, they will also be available, but we just don't know if we'll get them in time.
Can you just repeat the date?
October 13th.
Who's giving us these shots?
Typically, it's the health
Oh,
department.
okay.
Me. I am.
You're not gonna let Chuck do it.
This is the-
I know, that's why I was concerned.
You'll find out how he really feels about you there. A reminder that this weekend is the Red Rock Arts Festival, September 29th to October 1st. Really great events planned. The Mark and the other recreation department divisions have been helping out in planning that, and it's a big event and one of my favorites. I wanted to give an update just on some construction projects so you know where they are and in case you get questions from residents. The retaining wall at Woody's should be complete by the end of October. We really appreciate the community being patient when it comes to closing that part of the parkway. We know it's not convenient, but it just makes it much more efficient to complete the project and it's a lot safer. The Birch Sewer project should be completed by the end of October, although that one is going pretty smoothly. No big hiccups on that project for the sewer replacement. We're beginning the chip seal that will be going down Mill Creek about October 16th. That's tentative, but we're just sort of waiting, I think, for the contractor to finish up with some other projects. And really good news, we are done with the Keene Creek design. It's at 100%. We are out to bid starting next week, October 5th. So we are on schedule with where we need to be when it comes to the CIB loan and grants. So there's a huge lift on engineering departments, you know, on their plates that I really appreciate them just sort of hustling and making sure we're complying with those timelines. And that's all I've got.
Thanks, Carly. Moving on to council reports. We'll start with you, Kaylin.
The county is doing their future land use plan where they look at like what a rational distribution of zones for future land uses. And so they had a steering committee meeting, and Michael and Corey and I were there and engaged in small discussions looking at the boundary between the city and the county in the south edge of the city, trying to think how that might develop and how to make county zoning compatible with the city zoning. So that's a smooth transition as the city annexes. Attended a solid waste district meeting and another Moab area task force meeting as we continue to work through the revised housing plan, looking specifically at the action plan and goals. And I attended the Parks Master Plan open house. Looks like they're making good progress there. That's what I've got.
Great. Thanks, Kaylin. Ronnie?
Not a lot. Our groundwater and sewer meeting that got canceled on the 21st will be this week, the 28th, a special meeting because of the auditor. Attended an Upper Colorado River Commission meeting on the 21st and hung out on Zoom for the Water Utility Resource Management Plan on the 20th of September. I missed the LPC meeting today, so maybe, I don't know if Carly made it, if she has anything. A little more information on how the Indigenous Peoples' Day celebration that the city is supporting is coming together. Don't have a time yet, but I can tell you there'll be a speaker and performers, a vigil and food. We'll let you know when flyers and details on social media are available on that. Then I was just going to double check because somewhere in my notes, I had a note about a city county meeting on October 18th, and I wasn't sure if that was happening.
That's the C4 meeting with Kaylin.
Oh, okay. Okay, thanks. Okay, no, at first I was like, oh, is this the whole thing? Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Ronnie. Tawny.
Okay, I will try and be really fast. Canyonlands Healthcare Special Service District. The main topic of discussion was a wrongful death lawsuit that the care center has been named in. The care center, our care center, never had this person as a patient. The facility that had her as a patient is a facility that the Special Service District has a financial agreement with. As a preliminary action, there was a licensing hearing at the Department of Professional Licensing. They recommended that we be removed, but their recommendation isn't binding. So at this point, we are hopeful that our attorney will get our name taken off that because we didn't ever have anything to do with that patient. That was the biggest thing we discussed. I attended the HASU meeting, and I won't go over all these in respect of time. The biggest news is that HASU has closed on new office space. They bought the old free clinic space on 500 West. They are planning to rent their space up here on Center Street and eventually turn it into housing. And then Bennett and Lara from the staff were selected to be sponsored by the Housing Assistance Council to attend a rural housing conference in Washington, D.C., October 23rd through 27th, and all of the expenses will be paid by HAC. So that's kind of a big deal for them. I also worked at HMK the other day with Hope Alliance, which is a group that comes to town 3 times a year to do vision and hearing screenings for the kids. Kids 1st through 3rd grade can get a free screening if they are not meeting their reading benchmarks or SPED referrals. And I am not familiar what that acronym means, but it just seemed like a really, really good program. And I was SPED, there's,
Special ed.
is that what it is? Okay. And I was amazed at how poorly some of those little guys could see. I mean, I'm pretty blind without my glasses, but that was pretty sad that some of those little 5 and 6-year-olds were struggling that hard. So, and it's a good program. They do, if they're uninsured, they get a voucher for the free exam and free glasses. So that's it.
Thanks, Tony. Jason.
I don't have a whole lot. I went to an airport board meeting and there wasn't a ton of stuff that we really talked about there. They got their certificate of occupancy for their new snow removal equipment shed, which is pretty nice. And they're planning on putting a new fence around the airport. The airport's been fairly busy, not as busy as it was last year, but fuel's up slightly on I think the fuel's up slightly on jet fuel, but look down on regular fuel, I think is what they were saying. But not a whole lot there. And then I attended the Parks Master Plan open house, the Mark, and that was about it.
Thanks, Jason. Luke.
So I attended the LHC meeting where we had a new organization join us called the Homeless Veterans Fellowship. It's an organization that provides services statewide and it's largely focused on providing housing to veterans. So trying to get a bit more familiar with the details of that program and like how applicable it is to our community's veterans. I also attended MOP and WIRMP last week on the same day. At MOP, we got a bunch of kind of updates on stream restoration projects, along with some like flood mitigation, repairs and restoration updates. And then at WIRMP, had a lot of new information presented and a really good kind of breakdown of where we, how we've gotten to where we are in the process. And I also volunteered, or I participated in the Pride Visibility March and then volunteered at Harvest Festival for YGP, which is, I think I heard their staff saying it was probably like the best attended Harvest Festival they've had in a long time. So really excited to hear that. They're a fantastic organization and it's really wonderful to see the community come out in support of them. And then other than that, just had my meeting with the mayor and Carly, and I think that's about it.
Thanks, Luke. For me, had a meeting with a colleague from the National Park Conservation Association, Erica Pollard, to discuss their board meeting. Their board of directors is going to be in town October 25th through the 27th for their annual retreat. It's kind of a big deal. This is a board mainly out of Washington, DC, so it oversees the whole NPCA organization. So I'll be attending some of their events and welcoming the board to Moab. It'll be at the Voodoo. Also, we discussed the potential for a government shutdown, which is very likely to start Sunday, October 1st. I did see today that the Senate did pass a bill, but it needs to go to the House, and that's where it's likely to get stuck. In the event that the government does shut down on October 1st, the state of Utah has agreed to fund the Mighty Five parks, similar to what they did in 2018, I believe it was. So it'll allow the parks to stay open and the visitors to stay open, but I think services will be kind of limited. It won't be everybody. So that's good news for us, not so good news for other parks. Met with Columbus Pacific with Carly and Michael to discuss the Walnut Lane project. We'll be talking about that here in a minute. I also met with our attorneys to discuss some variety of issues. I participated in the Blue Ribbon Coalition litigation discussions. And then this Thursday, I have a AOG meeting. There's a lot on that agenda. One of the things that we'll be talking about is this Main Street project. And I've asked to be a part of that. It's a nonprofit group that's funding towns to relook at their Main Street. So I think it kind of lines up with what some of the conversations we had earlier And I think there's money available right now. Price and Brigham City are the ones that are getting funded to really look at their downtown. So hopefully we can get out on that, and I'll report back once I hear more about it. And that's all I have.
I have one thing I forgot to say. I think in the public, I have given some misinformation in the last week. I thought that our special meeting tomorrow was a public meeting. It is a closed session, so I apologize for that if I gave anybody that misinformation.
Right, and we'll be talking about that here in closed session to decide if we will have that meeting tomorrow. So with that, I'm going to ask for a motion to go into closed session to discuss reasonably imminent or pending litigation.
I move to go into closed session to discuss reasonably imminent and or pending litigation.
Motion by Kalen, second,
A second.
second by Tawny. Any discussion? All in favor?
Uh,
Okay, motion passes 5-0. Great.